We're matching today.
I know. Hi, guys. Welcome to Political Head Trauma with your guests, with our hosts, I should say. I'm Holly, and this is Jared, and we are Political Head Trauma.
Where if Head Trauma had a podcast, sound like this. Anyhow, we got Frank Mylar in. He's in the house. He'll be in the studio here.
He's candidate for Attorney General. He also had one heck of a turnout at our our state convention.
Yeah.
So the delegates adored him. He is going to the primary. So we need you to get to know him. And that's why we've invited him on the show. And he's graciously agreed. Not only that, but he's come in person. So we're very excited. And somebody that is also really endorsing him is our own sheriff, Paul Wimmer.
Paul Wimmer's endorsing him. And Paul will be joining us at about 3:00 on the show. He is
don't say where, but we'll let him decide.
He's away right now, but he'll be joining us, and we're excited to chat with him. And we'll also see if we can't get him to give us a little bit of how's the county doing.
Yeah, well, and he'll be calling in at 3. So welcome, Frank.
Thanks.
Thank you for being on the show.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's great to be here.
Yes, we've had a lot of opportunities to talk and meet with you. You've come out to the county a few times. You came to our county convention.
Yes, the week before.
Done cottage meetings. You did a great job at state convention.
Thank you.
And how was that for you?
Oh, that was great. It was actually, as some people know, that I had a 12-day jury trial leading up to that convention. And honestly, nobody has any clue to how crazy that is. I will tell you this, nothing will be as difficult in terms of when I'm in the Attorney General's office as running for Attorney General while being in a trial. And anyone that says otherwise has never conducted a 12-day. It's like putting on a production.
Yeah, I bet.
And there's a lot of pressure. You got to work at night. You got to work, every minute, basically. You got to prepare witnesses, make arguments. And so actually, it was nice to have that finished.
I bet you were more excited about that being finished than the convention results, because now you've got to gear up for a primary.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you're happy to be going to the primary for convention,
yes.
But that trial, I know you were on our show during that trial, and we actually got you in such a small window that you had open that Friday.
Yes.
And go back and see the show we did with him via Zoom. It was a great show, very informative. You definitely know what the job of AG and what that entails.
Yes.
So
I like that you also work on civil rights cases.
Yeah. I think to me, that's the most important things that I want listeners to really understand is that everyone that runs for this job says they're going to fight for people's rights, but really almost none of them ever have. You can go back looking at several of the last attorney generals. They've never done that. And then on top of that, they certainly haven't done it without charging. Yeah. And that's part of being part of the Alliance Defending Freedom is I don't get paid by Alliance Defending Freedom. I just litigate these cases that come up. And that's part of being an honor guard attorney is that you actually help them vindicate their rights without charging them.
Yeah. And I know amongst a lot of conservatives years back, they looked down on civil rights attorneys, but now they're starting to come around and recognize that it's the civil rights attorneys that fight to defend your constitutional rights.
That's right. That's right. Second Amendment, First Amendment, you name it.
Well, civil rights attorneys at this stage, I mean, after COVID happened, where churches weren't allowed to be,
right.
Where school was shut down, and yet people could riot in the street under the guise of protest. But I'm shocked if there aren't more people knocking down doors for their civil liberties that were violated during that time.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of people, churches especially,
Yes.
that are coming to your organization? And name the organization again.
Yeah, Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF for short.
ADF, go check out the website, you guys, because I was amazed by all the attorneys. How many are part of that?
Boy, I don't know.
100 and something.
It's a lot. It's adflegal.org is what you'd want to look up. And they defended the state of Idaho. They defended their pro-life laws just a few weeks ago in the U.S. Supreme Court. And the thing about this organization is they do that and they provide some of the best expertise, and they do not charge. So the state of Idaho did not have to pay for that expertise counsel in arguing those cases.
Amazing.
Yeah,
That's it. It's like a ACLU, except actually defending civil rights still.
That's actually, they were started in 1994 with several people that were in the Mies under Reagan administration's Justice Department. And they basically said, wait, we've got a real problem. The ACLU is winning because they're bullying. They're bullying school districts, universities, businesses.
They're getting corruption because of the money they're taking in and their interests they're representing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
the ACLU was good, once upon a time. But now it seems like they've just become, honestly, like everything else, a tool of the Democrats.
Yeah.
The Southern Poverty Law Center.
Right.
That one, they need to be raked across the coals and straightened out. Once upon a time, they stood for good actions. Now we're talking, long before I was born. But now they're just a corrupt organization, and they keep losing in court. Defamation cases.
Yeah. Even the ACLU in Utah, they actually filed the suits against every one of our jails and prisons in this state. I actually defended the bulk of all the jails, actually, including Tooele County here. Everyone but Salt Lake County, I defended, actually. And we basically said, look, we don't need the ACLU suing us. We're actually doing a fantastic job in Utah jails. We don't care.
What were they suing you over?
They were trying to say that we needed to do all these different mandates and things. And we were already, doing excellent things. We were already putting them, 2 weeks quarantine no matter what when they
over
came
COVID.
in. And if they were good when they came in, we put them in another place for 2 weeks. So we really had a double quarantine.
And our sheriff was unwilling to release anybody into the populace because of COVID, where Salt Lake County.
Yeah. And so the thing about, like Sheriff Wimmer and some of the others, they said, look, we're not going to compromise public safety, over a super flu type of, illness here. We'll deal with it, if they have it. But the bottom line is a lot of jails didn't have people with COVID. And when they did have it, there really wasn't a problem.
Well, and the science said that they weren't in danger of dying from COVID. The science came out and said it was less than 1%, and it got even less and less and less the younger you got. So
that's correct.
To release Sim Gill let a lot of bad guys out into the streets during that time. And I'm just, how do you get someone under control as the Attorney General? And do you have any oversight regarding prosecutors or DAs that are elected like him? How can the Attorney General do anything to rein them in or make them at least follow the laws and Constitution?
Well, one of the worst problems was actually Utah County when David Leavitt was the county attorney.
Say less.
And he was against the death penalty. He was against. He seemed like to want to not prosecute criminals. This was a problem that the Sheriff Smith had to deal with.
He wanted to go to trial with everyone, or plea bargain everyone,
or not even file charges.
Yeah, and there was no financial thought in his mind. I asked him, "Where are you going to get the money to do this?"
Yeah,
and he also took the death penalty off the table in his idea. And yet, though most criminals aren't charged with a death penalty case, as long as that's on the table, you can actually get criminals to confess, or to cooperate,
that's right,
or to even plea. And you'll get at least some closure for families.
Yeah. Yep.
He was ridiculous.
Yeah. And so, I wouldn't be technically over them, but when they're doing something that is clearly contrary to the law, then sometimes the AG can step in. And if nothing less, the AG actually should step in and say, look, you gotta prosecute these cases. If you don't prosecute them, we will.
So you can do that.
Is that how that looks when the AG steps in? It's you've got, because at that point you're defending the civil rights of victims and the general populace. So you would step in and you'd say, if you're not going to take care of this, we're going to pull it up to the state level. Is that how that would look?
Yeah. For instance, there is that sex abuse issues that the sheriff was investigating, and he was called out and criticized by the county attorney, even though these were honest people coming to them and saying, we've got some issues, they just need to be investigated. He complained, David Levitt complained about it.
Was it against him?
I think he was involved in it in some way, yes.
Yeah.
And that was part of the issue. But this
went quiet. What
it's
happened
still
to that?
not being prosecuted. And I'm wondering, why hasn't the AG's office picked up that case? I don't know.
Wow. And of all things, you can't have them investigating themselves. You'd have to have an outside investigation team. And why not the Attorney General's office?
Yeah.
I mean, that would make sense. But this goes into a lot. There's a lot of prosecutors out there who would just like to plea bargain out, avoid court time, backlogs,
Easy
everything
wins.
else. But you're actually a trial lawyer by trade.
Yes.
Like you are, compared to times, like you have had federal court cases. This isn't even just state, but 247
Yes.
federal court cases in this. How long is that in your career?
Yeah, that's in my career, and that's not counting the state cases. I also think that not all the cases I've had are actually on there, but that is a number of them. The other thing is there's a lot of appellate cases. I've had cases, across the country, a lot in the 10th Circuit, some in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. And so this is something that I'm also actively involved in on an ongoing basis, is fighting some of these cases on appeal, which is another important part of what the AG's office actually does.
What about any January 6ers that may come from Utah?
Yeah, well, that again it's a little bit problematic because the federal government is prosecuting in different places, and they're not prosecuting here in Utah.
Right.
And so there's not a lot I can do in terms of that. When they're going after somebody, then there doesn't seem to be basis to do so. That might be an ability to call that out. But I'm just simply not over the federal government.
You don't have standing,
No.
essentially.
No.
And that's just like with, what happened in Texas when they wanted to go over the election and against those states that had this quirky stuff that happened on election night.
Right.
And he was told by the Supreme Court he did not have standing.
Right.
Which makes me crazy because that election affected every state.
Yeah, and that is a principle that the Supreme Court really cares a lot about. And it's and then there's Article 3, where there's Article 3 standing is what they talk about it. There has to be a case in controversy that's real for that person that's actually filing.
I see.
And so that's an issue that
So we couldn't
when the
file
court-
for the people. You can't file on behalf of the American citizen
not in general.
in general.
Yeah. Now, if there's an incident that arises out of Utah, yes, absolutely.
So if we had any election questions, an AG could absolutely go and investigate that.
Yeah.
If Texas had their own election questions, they could have done the same.
Mhm.
So we needed Georgia, Wisconsin,
Pennsylvania.
Baltimore. So we just
Pennsylvania was one of the big ones because they made, as per the Pennsylvania Constitution, unconstitutional changes to their electoral process.
Yes.
And when it was brought to them, they got kicked out for not having standing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was too late. And it was a weird system, is you have to wait until it's said and done before you can argue it. But once it's said and done, there is no court on earth that is going to take the chance of overturning it.
Yeah.
Not in the United States, because that's the United States admitting something similar to saying, our institution is broken right now.
Yeah.
And no court would dare say that unless it's absolutely in peril.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's true.
how does that look? I do want to get back to talking about your run, but how does that look for the federal government as far as January 6th goes? Are they out? If they nab someone and charge them, do they charge them all in DC, but we're seeing some charges come out of South New York or something.
Yeah, I don't know why they would do that.
Are they
I guess
shopping for
I think
courts?
they are, because that's a very liberal area.
They're
obviously.
shopping for.
It seems like it, but DC is pretty liberal too.
Yeah.
So.
DC
I-
is ridiculous. It's just I imagine DC doesn't have the wherewithal to.
It might be overburdened. And the thing that really troubles me about the January 6th is that they're treating them all as one person. You know,
Yeah.
some people were actually let in the Capitol. There's no
Absolutely.
question about
More
that.
than let
Some
in. They
people
were
broke in and broke glass and damaged things. And I think a lot of those people, you know, were actually different liberal groups, you know,
Yeah.
and it's really a hodgepodge of a lot of different people.
If not the FBI itself.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
that's been, they couldn't say the FBI wasn't there
Yeah.
when questioned. Yes, the FBI was there because we had to be there, but were you in plain clothes? Were you
Right.
masked? Were you going into the Capitol?
Yeah.
Did anyone know you were FBI?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. That's true.
So you would be absolutely prepared, it sounds like, to actually really prepared to go before a Supreme Court.
Mhm. Yes.
Have you done that before?
So I've gone before our Utah Supreme Court on numerous occasions, argued many cases. Many of them are precedent-setting cases, and many times before the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. It's very, very difficult to get before the U.S. Supreme
I'm
Court.
sure.
I've had a lot of briefs. In fact, I had said this on the campaign trail. I just filed one the first part of April, a U.S. Supreme Court brief. So I have filed a lot of those, and it depends on what the issue is. And this is what's unique, I think, to my campaign and what I would do in office. Because I'm part of Alliance Defending Freedom, I don't stand alone. I have this amazing group of some of the best experts in the country on any given issue. I've also worked with people like the Immigration Law Institute.
Yeah.
And so and I've worked with, you know, Specific Legal Foundation. There's different groups, they deal with property usually. And so there's different areas of expertise by some of these groups. Alliance Defending Freedom basically covers religious freedom, pro-life issues, pro-family issues, which is broad. That includes Title IX issues, protecting
Pro-legal immigration issues.
yeah, and protecting women's sports and women's bathrooms. And so they're fighting all these battles. But then might be some other groups, American Center for Law and Justice. I helped bring them in. They defended the 10 Commandments in Pleasant Grove several years ago, and Vernal got to join in on that. And that was actually quite an interesting case because in Pleasant Grove, this happened about over 20 years ago. The city attorney knew I had run for attorney general and I cared about constitutional issues. And she called me up and said, Frank, they're trying to take down our 10 Commandments. Can you help us? The mayor doesn't want to. So other cities had taken them down. And so what happened was I met with her and the mayor, and I listened to the facts of the case because I know religious freedom cases. Even though I know religious freedom cases, I didn't take that case. This is where I actually deferred and said, you know what? I can get you one of the best in the country and they will not charge you a dime.
Wow.
And it ended up being Frank Mylar from the American Center for Law and Justice. He was the one that actually defended that successfully. It won at the U.S. Supreme Court, lost at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. So these are battles, I'll tell you. And it would have cost the city over $500,000
easy.
easily.
And then an appeal and to lose it.
Yeah. And so the fact that that they had a free attorney vindicating their, and then Vernal got to join in. So Vernal and Pleasant Grove were the anomalies who said we're not taking down our 10 Commandments because they got to be part of this suit that displayed the excellent case law for the whole country.
Is it still ongoing, or did they?
No, we won.
Won.
This was several years, 20 years ago.
It was amazing.
Yeah. So
That is amazing. And, you know, with being an attorney general, there's going to be a lot that comes up. And something that's important for us is the federal land issue.
right. Mhm.
So will you go into that? What your plan would be? I mean, we're here in rural Utah,
Right.
even though we're only, 25 minutes outside of the hustle and bustle of our capital
Yeah.
city. But we're 84 86% owned by the federal government in this
Yes.
county.
This is complete nonsense. And again, the others will say they're going to fight the feds. I'm already involved in fighting the feds. Actually, this brief that I filed before the U.S. Supreme Court over a month ago, that was actually trying to fight federal encroachment in eastern Utah. And I understand, and I've talked to Sheriff Wimmer. He's explained some of these issues to me as well, that they can't complete a road because the federal government is saying, oh, no, you can't do this. And even though there's a road, sometimes they won't let them help, repair the road, and make it better, for travel, even though people are already traveling on it. And so we're getting nickel and dime.
And on top of that, they'll demand the purview to be able to shut the road down on their whim. So they'll demand control. They won't maintain it. And then they won't even allow county or city to maintain it. It's ridiculous. And it was simply done because we got stripped of the gold standard and they had to have something to use as a bartering tool on the world stage.
Well, I'll tell you, I go back even farther on this. When you look at most of the states, the Western states, when they became states, the federal government deeded over land to them. For some reason, this didn't happen in Utah and Nevada.
Yeah.
And it's just completely wrong. We were actually treated differently. There's different issues that I actually want to bring to the table. If I'm elected on June 26th, if I win this nomination, I'm going to start on it then. Because I have some pretty unique case law. I don't want to spill the beans yet on exactly what I'm going to do.
Well, let's not give them a heads up. Go on and surprise them. Tell us after.
But yes, I plan on taking this back and saying, look, we should quit playing with this game of them regulating us to death. It needs to be Utah land. The vast majority needs to be deeded to Utah. And I'm not going to stop until that happens.
What does that look like once it's deeded? Because this is something a lot of people get in their mind and they get a little worried. They picture the federal government getting out of Utah's lands, but then Utah or the legislature deciding to sell it all off to developers or drillers or miners. And what does it look like? Because I don't have a problem if they use the land for public use like we want, but we live out here in the West Desert, and who's to say that there's not maybe a check for oil out here or to build another refinery or, to create nuclear power out here, clear out in the West, all the way to Wendover.
Right.
What do you see the end result? And if you do go to the Supreme Court with this, do you have to show what that end result would look like in your case, or is that not necessary?
Not necessary at all, but I would envision that, first of all, if there's nice areas and they're going to deed them back. Although I think, let's be honest, Escalante has some very beautiful areas. It's very, very small compared to the Grand Staircase. Same with Bears Ears. And so I think to start with, we'll give them, those little circles of this is some nice land here. A lot of that land is not something that's picturesque. It's good for cattle ranching. It's good for ATV riding. And it's important to be able to travel from point A to point B in these rural areas, and for farmers and others to be able to do that. They need to cross these lands. But so as a practical matter, it's not like something that we need to protect by and large. But I do think it's appropriate to say, give some of these ranchers an opportunity to say, you can buy this land. Now, it's not going to be just you're using federal land.
As a solo or as a group, if they want to buy it as a coalition, why not have the federal government, if they want, if they want to keep the Bears Ears under their purview, apply and make it federal forestry land. Yeah. Just like they do with the canyons around here, and then they manage them. And like do all that, or even the Stansbury, Middle Canyons, all that. That's all under federal purview. But they're not. They don't need to have everything everywhere.
No, they don't. And the other thing, I want us to be able to maintain roads that are used, and the people need to get, like in the rural areas. It's a big deal if you can take this road that's not like the most well-traveled road, but it saves you sometimes a couple hours.
Sure.
Right.
And it's safe.
Yes. And it's safe. And the other thing is law enforcement. I want law enforcement to be able to enforce laws, because sometimes the federal government doesn't really have an interest
Or to when you get people out on these trails and they get hurt,
Mm-hmm.
our law enforcement responds, but so do other
Yep.
response teams that need to be able to do that. And who's paying?
Yeah.
Who's paying? Who's watching? Who's closest?
Yeah.
How do we save these people in that situation? I know our sheriff has been
Mm-hmm.
frontline on that,
Yes.
trying
Yep.
to work with the federal government to make sure that his deputies can be there in a time crunch, but that they're not having to eat the costs.
Right.
That'll
And-
kill a county.
Exactly, and so they should reimburse every time we provide those kinds of services. And really, in a lot of ways, county sheriffs are on the front lines of fighting these issues.
It's just, I find it funny. We're going to have some people that listen that are Democrat leaning or progressive,
Mhm.
and they're going to scream right now about, no, all the lands need to stay with the federal government. But if we flip the tables and put a Democrat in our governor's office and a Republican in the White House, they would be on the exact opposite side. And it's comical to see that flip.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I recognize that flip all
Is
the
it
time.
comical or is it just now disgusting?
Republicans do it too.
Absolutely. It's
Republicans
disgusting.
were all about the FBI has all this, and the FBI ran forward with COINTELPRO. And now the very program they designed to fight the anti-war activists in the 60s is being used against them today.
Yeah.
Well, and that was, the FBI, that was one of the things that I tried to put the brakes on over 20 years ago when I appeared before Senator Hatch's Judiciary Committee before the Senate and testified and provided a brief saying that you should not have these FISA warrants, Section 702, where you can just eavesdrop on all these American citizens. I said, I'm okay to do that with non-citizens. That's perfectly appropriate and constitutional. And basically what the problem with FISA is that they're using concepts that are applicable to the CIA when they're operating outside this country. And now they're applying them in this
They're
country.
not under the guides of the Constitution of the United States.
They're not following your usual warrant guidance
That's right.
to
Fourth
obtain a
Amendment.
warrant.
This so feels like the Minority Report.
Mm.
You hear these things where people are they're being listened to. Well, we caught up an American just because of the communication that happened between a foreign person. The American got caught up in it. And then we find out that the dossier, which I always have to remind you people, was proven to not be true. And they ran with that for 4 years. Then it not only got proven to not be true, but it was proven that the FBI lied to the FISA court. And there was someone who went to jail over that.
He didn't go to jail. He got 6 months disbarment. Right? Am I
thought
correct?
he went to jail for
That
30 days.
FBI lawyer?
They
don't send their guys to jail. No, he got 6 months where he couldn't practice law. That was his big retribution.
But then the leader of the FBI, which was Comey at the time, Comey, nothing happens to him other than he resigns. He's probably sitting pretty on his retirement.
Well, his daughter, isn't she instrumental in investigating the Wimmer and a handful of the J6 cases?
I don't know.
I think, his daughter's one of the prosecutors on either both or one of those. So but it's a big swirling mass of, just refuse when you start dealing with national politics.
Did you send Paul his Zoom link?
I did. Yeah. But no, it's so but I really want to get back to your, if you make AG, we've talked about how you're going to start arguing to get the land back in the hands of the state. And that's also the state could lease it out, make revenue, ease up some of our burden as a taxpayer. What are some of the other objectives?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've talked about is I want to close the faucet on us being a de facto sanctuary state. It's true.
The governor says we're not, though.
Well, that's why I use the word de facto. So there was the governor and the legislature when ICE did try to designate us as a sanctuary state. We put up a stink, which was good, and said, no, you're not doing this. But the reason it's de facto is because airline flights are dumping people here. Sometimes busloads are dumping people here, and we're not doing anything about it.
And they're
You know.
also dumping them in Salt Lake County.
That's what I'm saying.
And we've got
in Ogden too, Wimmer County.
our district attorney there has no interest in doing that.
Well, it is in some ways. I'll tell you this: it's really more the job of the AG's office. I'll tell you, and that's something that the AG, I believe, should get involved in, and that's what I would get involved in. I would June 26th. If I win this primary, I'm going to go to the legislature and say we need some laws to make it a felony to bring somebody or fund somebody to come to Utah that's an illegal alien.
Who would that? Let's say that comes in. Okay. Let's say that comes in on an aircraft that has been booked by the federal government.
Yeah.
Who would that felony be handed to?
The pilot.
So you could
all
hand
the
it.
stewardesses.
So you could hand it to them. So that
And
way,
who funded and who
before
funded it.
they take off in wherever,
Yeah.
they refuse to fly.
Yeah, they won't fly. I'll guarantee you, a pilot's not going to risk losing his, excellently lucrative. Pilot's license.
And hard-earned job.
Yes, and so once they know that, they're not going to come in.
And then
so I'll close the faucet. The next thing I want to do is round up the people they have dumped here and send them back to New York.
Yeah.
You can't send them. Some people have said, "Why not send them to Mexico?" I said, half these people aren't even.
They're
Mexican.
not from Mexico.
You know,
Most
it's
of half are from China. The other half are from deep Central America and South America.
Yeah, in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so and they destroyed all their documents before they crossed the U.S. border, so they could bounce from different country to country because they had documents. They said, "No, we're not staying in this country. We're heading to the U.S." So
they become a person without a country. So you
send him back to New York. But if that's New York mayor, New York City mayor is the one who's shipping him here. Is that correct?
So, but now it'll be illegal to ship him here. But New York's so liberal, they will not pass a law saying it's a felony to bring him there.
If Adams sent the orders down and figured out, got him on a train or a bus, whatever, made it so that the pilot or the
conductor
could you issue a felony against Mayor Adams?
From New York?
Yeah.
Yeah, if he's funding it.
You could?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing about felonies is you can extradite across state lines.
That'd be
they're
wild.
going to think twice about sending anyone to Utah. They'll just say, "Okay, that's too hard. We're not going to send them there."
Can you guys imagine extraditing the mayor of another city to your state because he's sending you busloads or trains?
Has that ever happened in the past?
I don't know. I don't think so.
We probably have to go back into
undocumented Democrats.
Probably have to go back into like the Wild West days when things were really wild. Like a guy would be a criminal 2 counties over and the sheriff where you lived.
Yeah.
Which was very common back then. But
tell me about election integrity and the idea that, they're talking about potentially a secretary of state, which we talked about at the SEC meeting, which I love the idea.
I do too.
If the governor was going to appoint anyone, perhaps a secretary of state, but I also think I'd rather them be elected.
They should be elected separately. That is the way it is in other states. They are separately elected. And just like why you want the attorney general, why you want the auditor, the treasurer, and the school board, all of those are functions that need to be independent of the governor.
Accountable to the people, not the governor.
You don't want to build a petty monarchy.
That's right. That's right.
Which is what it is.
Yeah.
If the governor comes in and appoints these people, and I've seen him deny that, but then I've seen people from the legislature double down on the idea and why it makes sense. And I'm thinking that's tyranny.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. A lot of states do have secretaries of state and they are separately elected, and that's what we should do.
We should. I mean, whether you trust your lieutenant governor or not.
Yeah.
If I was a lieutenant governor, I would not want that purview where I have any hands in the election pot that got me in there.
Well, here's the problem too with the lieutenant governor position. People aren't really electing the lieutenant governor.
No,
they don't really scrutinize this person and say, "Hey, is there some problems with this person?" And yet, often they go on to become governor.
Yeah,
And whereas if you're standing alone like a secretary of state, you're on your own.
Well,
you're not running on the coattails of the governor or anyone else.
You have true accountability.
You got to have there's direct
lieutenant governor sometimes it's just a cherry on top to the candidate of governor.
Yep.
And let's say Oh, sorry.
They're not actually in depth looked at like the governor
Right. It's like a vice president.
Yep, it's just like
Yeah.
that. So whoever you choose, but again, what a lot of people may not realize is the lieutenant governor does set policy for elections that are overspread across the state. But it's your county clerks that follow those policies, and they oversee the county elections.
Correct.
So, I mean, it's not always fair to come down on the lieutenant
That's
governor
true.
regarding election integrity. She is setting the policy, but we need election integrity first and foremost.
Yeah.
And whatever that looks like, if it's a secretary of state, so be it.
Yeah.
A secretary of state may be the person that needs to talk to California, talk to Texas, figure out our problem with immigrants and how we work together to get them where they need to go, or at least get them out of the West Coast, the west side.
Well, and the other troubling part is some of these states like California and New York are potentially trying to make a path for them to be able to vote.
Exactly.
Even if they don't, just the census will give them more Congress seats.
Yeah.
So they don't even have to battle through to give the vote to illegals, to future Democrats,
It
as
just
the
went onto the
Democrat
floor.
Party calls them.
Universal voted on the floor.
Well, yeah, but they don't even have to.
Yeah.
Because California lost 4 seats in our last census,
They did.
and New York lost 3,
And Florida picked up 4.
and Florida
That was
picked
a
up
swing.
4
That was a swing of
with
8.
these illegal
Yeah.
immigrants.
And so that's right now. They can't count the legal immigrants.
Yeah.
But this is the problem. They're going to try to.
Oh, you watch the minute they get Congress back.
Yeah.
That'll be the first thing that
Well,
gets
the
called to the
census
floor.
happens every 10 years.
That's fine. They'll get a law through because they can sit on their hands for 10 years. You give California, you give Democrat ran California and Democrat ran New York, and you give them each 4 more congressional seats. Watch to see what those congressional district maps look like.
Well, Trump got so much crap when he tried to make sure that the census was only taken of the legal American citizens. And I think that our Senate, our Congress needs to put a law in place where that's actually a thing.
Well,
where you can only census.
It is. The problem is that they're trying to ignore it.
The ACLU is saying you can't ask people if they're legal citizens or not. That's asinine.
It is.
It
for
keeps
a census.
crazy.
It keeps sitting at the doorway to being brought to the floor to ignore it in the Congress and the Senate. It keeps getting brought to the doorway. And right now, the Senate would probably still stop it. I think they're close enough, and there's still enough Democrats from states that are responsible that would stop it.
Yeah.
But the minute they get the Congress back, I think we'll see it brought to the floor until it passes.
Yeah, it's really a huge the importance of getting control of the Senate and then of the Congress. It's going to impact Utah. I wish it didn't impact us as much as it is. But here's something that I'm going to tell you, that there was a potential window in 2016 and we missed it. The window was we had a GOP House and Senate and presidency.
Trifecta.
If we get that again in 2024, that's when I'm going to go full steam ahead with this land issue and the immigration issues. I'm going to hit both of those because those are supposed to be, those are full, and they're federally related. And that will be the time to say, look, give us our land. This should be our land. We shouldn't be tinkering with the federal government owning over 2/3 of our land.
Yeah, and being okay with your PILT money, which is pennies on the dollar, and it's not adequately taking care of the land, nor is it overwatch on that land.
That's how you strip sovereignty.
Under Herbert, Governor Herbert said, we need the presidency, the House, and the Senate before we're going to go after our federal land deal. We had it. The problem was we had a Senate and a House that wasn't supporting our president, people's choice.
We had a party that wasn't supporting our president.
Oh, we had 2 parties.
Well, we had
the line
Republican.
between them was so skewed.
The Republican Party didn't support him. That's when you see the what was it?
Executive orders.
What was the log? The Lincoln Republicans or whatever.
The Lincoln Project.
Yeah, the Lincoln the pedophile project.
Right.
That's when they come out and
minor attracted person.
oh, I'm sorry. I stand corrected. I used that word word. But
Disgusting.
they come out and they went hard against him, and it was a confusing time. Now, I am not a Republican. I'm an outsider that can just watch this. And
Are you an independent then, or what?
yeah, independent, libertarian,
Okay.
something along those lines. I'm very conscious of the of civil rights.
Yeah.
And I'm a student of history, and I see that there's not a good party on civil rights. There's not. The Republicans, well, in the 60s, it was the Republicans and Democrats both abused it equally because of the anti-war movement. And I'm wondering if we're going to see that come again, where we got these two populist movements growing up within both parties. You know, you've got the RFK supporters on the Democrat side, and then you've got this populist movement on the right, you know, that Nancy Pelosi goes and looks like a moron at the Oxford Union trying to say that they're just racist, which she got.
It's old. That accusation has gotten to.
Did either of you watch that Oxford Union debate she had?
Oh, I did.
Against the banjo player, Winston Marshall?
Yeah, and he
was
got her good.
fantastic.
He got her good, but the
excellent.
students agreed with her. But he won on the internet. She won in the House, and she could have won, but her argument was flawed. And when you watch the whole video, she's just over there yelling, "Who are you?" Like
interrupting him sometimes.
she was.
You guys check
She
that
was
out if you haven't seen
aghast
it.
that someone spoke out against her, because she
It's
is.
on YouTube, right? Called the Nancy Pelosi
It's the Oxford Union debate,
Oxford Union debate.
and it's Winston Marshall versus Nancy Pelosi.
It's really good. I mean, he even talks about January 6th, and
He does.
She tried to make it sound like, again, you compare January 6th to 9/11 or to D-Day or to World
The
War
flood
II.
of Noah. January 6th is with the flood of Noah.
This is just,
It's a mankind massacre.
it's insane.
Well,
How do
you look at all the rioting that happened in 2020.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, in most major democratic cities in this country, and that's something that they keep leaving out.
Yeah.
These are
Summer
democratic
of love.
cities, and they're out of control. And those were way worse than what happened on January 6th.
I would argue it like this. One, we all know I am an IQ 32 moron, but were I in front of the Supreme Court, I would argue it that the summer of love and the summer before that, and every summer while Trump was president, made it so that political arguments were violent. And those were all because that's the only argument that got any attention from either side. One, they sucked all the air out of the room, and they absorbed all of your resources to try to maintain a city. And it kept escalating. And of course, January 6th happened because that was the only way allowable for a political argument to happen over the 4 years
And
prior.
it was the first time that conservatives actually decided to protest and take a play out of the left's book. But you know, this I want to get into with you because it was under Obama, and people don't realize that Black Lives Matter was started, and the hands up, don't shoot, and that's a political argument that got people rioting, killed people, got them in trouble, and you get to see Antifa created, and if it wasn't for Black witnesses who wanted to remain anonymous, the truth about what happened with the hands up, don't shoot movement, Michael Brown.
And also don't forget the investigation done by he was mayor of Chicago. What's his name?
Anyway,
his
Daley, you mean, or
his
years ago?
His Obama's
can you text him the link?
Texting the link is hard.
Okay, can you send it again to him? He hasn't
I
gotten
can.
it. So what I'm getting at is this all happened under President Obama, and we got to see what was normally
pull up his email.
An awesome. I mean, our country was in a good race place, right?
Yes, they were.
So here we are, and all of a sudden now everybody's turning on the blue.
Yeah.
And now you've got what's his name is kneeling at the NFL and drags the NFL into it. It all becomes political.
Yes.
Now police officers are scared because cities aren't having their back.
Right.
And when it comes to lawsuits, the cities, it's almost easier to throw your officer to the wolves than to defend them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, having a brother that's a county deputy, I worry all the time.
Yeah.
Like, what if he hesitates
Mm-hmm.
in a life and death scenario to protect himself or others?
Right.
What if he doesn't, and he does end up shooting someone and they happen to be a black or a brown person?
Yeah.
Will they have his back? And that's where you have actually walked the walk, talked the talk. You've defended law enforcement who's actually been in these scenarios, I assume.
Yes.
And black or white, whoever they shoot, it's automatically a lawsuit, right?
Yeah, well, and it often is, absolutely. And I have defended a lot of use of force cases. It's interesting. A couple cases I didn't defend that I did want to comment on. One of them, there was a case in Salt Lake City, and this was during the time of COVID, and it was a shooting, and Black Lives Matter and all these groups were trying to make a big deal about it until they found out that the officer was Hispanic that shot a Hispanic. And then they dropped it. It's like, oh, okay, we're
Doesn't
done.
fit the narrative.
It didn't fit their narrative. Another law enforcement case that I'm aware of was, I think it was Saratoga Springs, when the guy had the samurai sword.
Yeah.
And they paid $900,000, which is a waste of taxpayer money on a dangerous situation. They said it was like a, what is it? It wasn't like the real authentic samurai sword.
Was it sharp and metal?
But it was metal.
I don't care.
So it doesn't matter.
I don't care if he has a well-worn garden trowel.
Yeah.
That guy is a threat.
The biggest
Rahm
red knife
Emanuel.
ever.
Yeah.
Rahm Emanuel's the guy's name.
Thank you, Chad.
He investigated it. He went down there. He sent his own coroner down, investigated the Michael Brown shooting, and Obama's race baiting desire coroner came back and said, one, there was a shot fired in the car, and that shot was fired because Brown was reaching for the weapon while the cop was still in the car.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the other
With
shots,
witnesses back
the
up.
other shots were hit him in the front,
Mm-hmm.
and he was in a charging posture.
Yeah. Yep.
Because he wasn't leaned back.
Mm-hmm.
The rounds came in at a level that they could tell that he was
No
moving at
defensive
him.
wounds.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Those are very problematic. And of course, I haven't seen all the facts on those cases, but we've seen a lot of them.
Mhm.
And it makes you really wonder. One of the persons that I love analyzing some of these situations is Candace Owens.
Oh, yeah.
She has a completely different take on George
She's
Floyd.
brilliant.
Yeah. In fact, she's not an attorney, but she would have done a better job defending that officer in Minnesota than whoever attorney's defending.
Yeah.
This poor officer, and I say that because I've seen the footage, guys. I've seen the body cam footage of these officers when they first make contact with George Floyd, which most people and the media will not show you. But when they first make contact, all the way through to where you see him sitting on the street in a police position, holding him, waiting for an ambulance. And then this officer is doing life.
Yeah.
And then they move him to Arizona.
Yeah.
And the day the autopsy report comes out that shows that George Floyd would have died of an overdose of fentanyl within hours of that. Then he's stabbed nearly to death by a federal
prisoner.
We need to look and see
an FBI informant.
Yeah, we need to see if that's one of the Wimmer case informants. The FBI. I'm sorry, right now, the FBI needs to be at least restructured. I think it needs to be torn down. You got the Wimmer case where there's 18 individuals on trial. 12 of them are FBI, either paid informants or actually paid, what do you call it? Little assisters.
Yeah.
The only person charged is an FBI informant that was sent in there to set up all the explosive buys.
Right.
And just to target 6 people.
Yeah.
Who all of them are probably IQs matching mine, because that's the FBI loves targeting dumb people. They love it. They do it every time.
So Chad actually says, would love to know more about what you've done to help women
Sure.
who've had to endure the trauma of abuse.
Oh, excellent.
And I highly recommend, again, if you guys watching, check out the website for adflegal.org, because
I'll flash it up. real
there's
quick.
so much you were a part of
Mhm.
with this alliance.
Yes. Yes.
And you cover so many different
Yes.
things. We'll show the website, but please talk about
Yeah.
what you've worked on with abused women.
Absolutely. And so I have handled these kinds of cases. I've handled cases where there's false, but I've also, most of it is not false, believe it or not. And actually, the statistics show that when a woman comes forward and says she's been abused, if you take politics aside, they're almost always telling the truth. It's always the politic ones that you have to question. Like they pull it out, in the 2 weeks into the Supreme Court
The October
nomination.
surprise.
It's just garbage, and people don't believe them, and they investigate them and say this is
And they actually
ridiculous.
should be charged, I think,
Yeah.
with the same. I think if you lie about something like that,
Yeah.
you should actually be charged and get the same amount of time that person you lied about would have gotten if they
Yeah.
were found guilty.
But so that's some. But one thing that I've done, and actually, I started helping in abusive cases in both in juvenile court, but also in divorces, and also getting protective orders. And my wife actually a few years ago actually started a ministry called Beauty from Ashes, and that actually is a ministry that gives kind of gospel solutions to people that are facing oppressive and abusive relationships. And what I've done in that is many times help free of charge women get protective orders. I found that I've had some mixed results sometimes, where sometimes I'll say, hey, go down to the legal clinic or something, and they'll help you get it. This one woman said, I went down there and they said I didn't have enough. I said, that's ridiculous. And the reason they might say they don't have enough is because when a woman is being traumatized like this, it's not necessarily a coherent line of reasoning. It's weird sometimes, because they'll say, like, he threw milk at me, and it's like, okay, he threw milk at you, but actually the week before he tried to choke you.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's like, that's somehow lost in the most fixed thing they fixate on. And so what I did with this woman that said they didn't have enough, I said, okay, tell me about it. What happened? Okay, we're going to restructure this. Let's take the 4 most abusive things. Let's take, first of all, the most recent abusive thing. Then let's get the 4 most abusive things, and then fill in, with all the other stuff after that. And usually, like I said, it's not hard to know whether someone can get a protective order granted, but a lot of them aren't. Now, are there some false protective orders? Absolutely. I've actually helped defend against false ones.
Well,
too.
can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
So let's say someone applies for a protective order,
Mhm.
and let's say there's no ancillary thing going on, like they don't have children with this person, which I
Okay.
could see how a protective order could interrupt the visitation of children.
Yeah.
Is there like is there a penalty for the person who gets charged with that protective order? Like, say it doesn't interrupt them going to work. It doesn't interrupt that.
They may not be able to carry a gun.
They might not be able to carry a gun, depending
Can
on
we
the
separate
circumstances.
that way? Because I would rather see, I'm going to lay this out flat.
Sure.
Protective orders have never saved anyone.
I don't know about that.
It's a
Yeah.
piece of paper.
Oh, well, yeah, either they abide by it or they. I agree with that.
That's
But
it.
It's
It
a
is.
reason to get somebody out
It's
the
a piece
streets
of
if they are
paper. All I'm
trespassed.
saying is what a protective order could be is the ability that if something bad goes down, you have someone to look at first,
hmm
right?
Well, it's more than that. It's I think that there's a certain amount of even moral restraint. There are some people that will hit their wives, but they often won't hit if they feel like it's going to be a charge.
Yeah.
And
They hit in a certain way,
and
and now that there's a protective order, they know I can't.
but
hit
if
her at
there's a
all.
protective
be on
order,
the
they
property.
can't. Or do they have to stay away from them?
Yes.
See, and that's fine. So I would argue, let's make it so that there's no punishment on the side of someone. Like, let's say some random not Holly, because she's going to be over here every Friday. So, but let's say a neighbor down the street says, I don't like that guy. I don't like he's got a brown Toyota. I don't like that his van looks creepy. I'm going to get a protective order.
They usually have a harder time.
But
It's hard.
but
That's because if you don't live with each other, actually, and this is the statistics are part of this too. it's the domestic violence that is the most dangerous, that you have to watch out for.
Oh,
So
it's most dangerous
so they have
for-
never lived with each other, they're honestly not as much of a threat.
I
It's
would-
actually much more difficult.
Dude, I got
To
a
get that.
protective order and it took me forever.
See, but
Had
this
I
is-
thought to go to an attorney, I would have loved to do that because it took me so many visits to the courthouse. I had to prove
Yeah.
time and time again why I needed it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make
and
this
I actually
argument.
had police reports.
And we got Paul in here, so we'll bring him on. But
Oh,
I
great.
want to make this argument. I would rather the protective order had punishment for the person it was taken out against.
Well, it doesn't immediately.
Okay, but I would rather make it so it's easy to get,
You mean easier to get? And
easier to get.
Well,
like,
if they violated, then there's the criminal penalty.
sure, but I want to make it so it's easier for the victim or the proposed victim to get. That way, a person doesn't have to go in and lay it all out. Yes, the judicial system is supposed to be a strenuous system on both parties.
But you make it easy to get. That's easy to lose your gun rights because somebody.
That's why I want to make it so that there's no penalty for the person who it's brought out against.
Well, there isn't a penalty straight off, usually, just to have a protective order against the person. But if they
Hi,
violate
Paul.
that protective order, then it is a criminal charge.
We don't. Okay, Paul. Welcome, Sheriff.
We're not hearing him right now.
We don't hear you yet.
You guys will both have to run.
Oh,
All right.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
there.
Talk again, Paul.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Oh,
I can.
we can. Yeah. I would rather, but we're talking about protective orders and just me postulating a dumb idea, as that's usually what falls out of my head. But I would like to see them easier to get. I don't want to see it so that we'll do a battered husband because I want to switch it up.
It happens once in a while, but it is much less often.
Yeah, it is.
far less reported.
Yeah, but so that it's easier for them to get. And I think the only way you can do that is take any punishment out on the other side. Like red flag laws, I think they're extremely unconstitutional. I think due process must be followed through for any punishment. I want the same thing with protective orders, so that a protective order doesn't have anything on the other side of it that would require due
You're
process.
still taking away the right to be where they want to be, a public place. Protective order actually eliminates a partner's ability to even go back to their home
Right.
or see their children, and without some guidance. Like you don't ask for a protective order if the person's just a good guy or a good gal. You do it because you're in fear for your life.
And you don't want it to be used punitively because you don't like somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I want. I want
Which
to
would
take
happen if
I
you
want
made
to
it
take
too
any
easy.
punitive measures out of it.
Well, yeah, and again, it's a civil action. And so once you file a protective order, it's a civil action. But then if they violate it, it turns criminal.
Okay.
And so it's not.
I think Paul is falling asleep. Are you awake, Sheriff?
I am awake. My apologies for not being there, but
No.
finances wouldn't allow it. So, even with the hat. So,
Hey, we were actually discussing some of the stuff you've been on the front line with, that Frank was telling us, regarding federal lands, and about how we know that you have been right up there trying to make sure that the federal government is got control for their lands. Our county sheriff's department has been really great about making sure that people using federal lands get care and help when they've hurt. But the county has to absorb costs like that. We also highlighted the fact that you, during COVID, refused to let out any violent criminals because of this. And Frank actually was talking about how the jails were all in very good shape and that he had to actually go to court over that. But you were the Supreme Court, and you were one of those sheriffs that said, I'm not going to risk my public over COVID. So talk a little about that, the involvement that you've had with Frank, exactly on these very important issues.
Yeah. Well, the Sheriff's Association and sheriffs throughout the state, we've known Frank for some time, and a lot of that has to do with some of the challenges we experience, whether it's the Disability Law Center, the ACLU, and then just in general best practices that get taught every year at the Sheriff's Conference. And Frank's on the front lines of teaching us what we should and should be and should not be doing legally that'll help keep it on the right side of the law. Nothing prevents someone from suing you. It's can they sue you successfully? And when it comes to the COVID issue, we had a number. It was a pretty angry request from the ACLU, and the sheriffs got together, and Frank was kind of the clearinghouse for that on gathering up what we have done to keep inmates safe during a pandemic. And we've done far more than what the ACLU had any idea. They filed this without even inquiring as to what steps we had taken to keep inmates protected. And I think in general, across the state, sheriffs did a fantastic job. I never had a significant outbreak. We had some onesies and twosies here. I think at one point we had as many as 6 or 7 people with it at one time, which our medical staff was able to deal with. And so the idea that we needed to release everybody in order to keep them safe was ridiculous, because that would have been a release of some potentially predatory human beings that would have just gone out and used this to their advantage and prey upon the innocents we're charged with protecting them from. And so we appreciated Frank's work on that. Our county attorneys were on board with that as well. And so it was a concerted effort, and that got junked about just as fast as the Supreme Court could hear it. And
do you think that the ACLU was just out shopping for maybe politically unfavorable sheriffs that had detention centers that they could go after, or just trying to get their name in the headlines again?
Yes, all of that. They're justifying their existence, and we knew that from the get, simply because they issued that potential lawsuit to sheriffs that didn't even have jails in their county.
Wow. And this happened during or after Summer of Love, during all that, where they've been rioting. And Trump is the first president to actually do criminal justice reform to try to help, balance the criminal justice system versus, maybe those who were treated differently because of their skin color.
Wasn't it the First Step Act?
The ACLU here coming out against sheriffs, this was all during BLM, and people forget BLM and COVID. So it was like, hey, you're putting these people, it was a left-wing notion, you're putting these people in danger because of COVID, and you're only locking up Black people, and your incarceration rates are insane. And I can only imagine they were doing this as a political stunt.
Yeah. And in fact, actually, they did this right away when COVID started happening. Remember, it started happening like sometime in middle of March.
Like they had a pre-filled out form and just wrote in COVID in one blank and prisoners in another, and hit print and went for it.
They actually modeled their suit after one in Chicago. And the crazy thing is the Cook County jail, which is huge. It's no prison is as
and
big
it's
as
still not big enough.
Yeah, but they ended up winning that suit, even in Illinois. And it's like, really, you're going to bring the same crazy suit that you already lost, and bring it in Utah. And the thing that I love about defending a lot of the Utah sheriffs is they really have good jails, and the protocols and everything they were doing, nobody could argue with. And we weren't about to say, oh, we're going to settle this suit with you so then they can do a big headline. and claim that they were able to achieve this
Right.
great change. And they said, no, we're already doing this. We're already doing an excellent job. In fact, we're doing some things that you don't even know about, that you didn't even ask about, that are actually
Better than what you
better.
proposed.
Yeah.
And that's something about our sheriff. Since he's been in office, he's done a lot with our
Mhm.
jail,
Yeah.
and he's been a shining star on that front, to where it's a lot to do. There's a lot going on there.
Mhm.
Jails aren't easy. I can only imagine what he thought when he took over, because it was just really chaotic, really expensive, and just the safety precautions that he's brought in, and the more deputies he's added, and the different security. So I mean, that's something that our county commissioners as well as our county council has applauded him on.
Yeah, just sit back, Paul. We're gonna be blowing up your skirt for a minute, because I've talked to multiple deputies, both road deputies that were there before you got in and after you got in, and correctional deputies of yours, and they've all said when Paul got in, he went through the books, he went through our processes, our procedures, and he took active steps to correct that.
And to get some of the problem children out
Yep.
that had been forgiven by another sheriff. Maybe their books aren't so clean, but our sheriff went in and said, this is our standard of expectation of excellence. And if you don't meet this standard, then you won't work here. So I would like to know, Paul, from your perspective, because for someone to run for AG and to be successful at it, how important is it? Because my history and my family and my, how I value law enforcement. So when I brought this to you many a times, that I need an AG that's going to support law enforcement, but coming from a sheriff's perspective, how important is an AG that is doing all he's done for like the Sheriff's Association?
Well, in statute, they will they call the AG the head law enforcement person in the state, and so we really appreciate when we have an AG that we can work with versus against. Now, that doesn't take away our responsibility to be held, the need for law enforcement to be held accountable. And we need an AG that is willing to do that when we have bad actors in our profession, because that does creates a mistrust from the public in law enforcement in general. And so, but what we also need is an AG that recognizes the challenges of this job, and that we have to do a lot of things that the public have no idea when it comes to dealing with the worst society has to offer. And just because there's been times when we are required to use violence in order to take out the violent human being, and having an AG that is supportive and understands the use of force challenges we experience during critical incidents is imperative. And I can't think of a person running or that has ran in recent memory that brings to the table what Frank brings to this office. And just understanding what we do day in and day out. And the way he understands that is he works with us through multiple avenues, whether it's training or when a lawsuit gets filed against us. And this should speak volumes about his capability, is whether it's Utah USIP, in the indemnity pool that insures an awful lot of government agencies throughout the state, or Utah Locals Governments Trust. When a lawsuit's filed, ultimately Frank is who they hire to defend counties, and whether it's county jails or road officers. This is an area of expertise for Frank that we've come to appreciate, and that's why we seek his expertise when it comes to training. And I don't mean to throw shade at any of his opponents, because there are some good people running for this office, but there's also good people that it's run for Tooele County Sheriff. And it is our job as voters to vet them out. We don't want good, we want great. We don't want someone with some experience. We want someone with a lot of experience that crosses a broad spectrum of issues that come our way, whether it's civil or criminal in nature. We need someone who's got some experience in all them areas. And it's not that Frank's going to sit there and do all the prosecuting himself or the defending himself. It is going to be Frank that ensures that his team of attorneys are doing what represents his office the best. And that's what we need. We need someone who actually has the experience to where there's them checks put into place. It's like, in order to qualify to run for sheriff, you simply have to have post, and then you have to attend, if you haven't got any jail experience, a jail administration class. Well, our voters have always been good about saying, all right, the minimum's not good enough. We want someone who really has some experience in that arena. And I think as voters, that's what we need to do for the AG, is not just vote someone in that meets qualifications, is a nice person and what have you, but someone who has been in the trenches, has done some battle, who has appeared before any number of courts. And Frank's that guy. And so that's why very early on in his campaign, when he announced, I was confident in throwing my support for his campaign his way. And so I've droned on a long time, but I want to make sure I get that out, that voters have been good about, in our county, they've been really good. And I believe this is across the state. We deserve better than someone meeting the minimum requirements. And we need to identify that when someone is running for an office that not just has the minimum, but is bringing something to the table that we need and may not be in the other candidates' tool belts. And I think when you start comparing resumes, it's hard to argue with Frank's experience.
You know, Paul is he's very, very well liked among our voters. I think that's an understatement.
Very big understatement.
I think our county,
well, it's not liked, he's trusted.
Yeah, our county delegates actually, he's still got the highest win I've ever seen
That's
at
great.
one of our county conventions.
Yeah, he'd have a rough time to not run. I think he might get
Oh yeah,
drug
People
in there
wouldn't allow
kicking
it.
and screaming.
They'd write him in and he'd win anyway.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is he doesn't endorse freely.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, when he had mentioned that to me, I was intrigued, because he's very, it doesn't do you any favors to endorse people when you're a sheriff. You need everyone to like you, and heaven forbid you have to work with someone that wins, that you didn't endorse. It's a really tough deal to endorse, especially an AG who's the top cop of Utah. And so I think that's really, exceptional. That it's a great endorsement to have.
Absolutely. And it's always a joy to work with a sheriff like Paul, because he is very professional, and both his jail and patrol team are just very professional in how they do things. And it's actually a delight because they have excellent policies in place. And so that makes my job actually easier when it comes to defending him. But
it bleeds down, because we've got what? Grantsville and Tooele PD, Stockton. I don't know what they've got going on now, but when you've got a sheriff that's strong, that has good policies, those policies bleed down into the PDs that are in the same areas, and it's just an overall boon for the whole county and everyone that lives there.
Yeah. And one thing that that the sheriff was talking about a little bit that doesn't get mentioned very much by the media and others is that my opponents have never actually prosecuted anyone. They have actually zero criminal law
Never
experience.
prosecuted anyone.
Not
I
one
see
person.
federal court cases, according to Pacer, you've got 247. Trent Christensen had 0, Derek Brown 4, and Rachel Terry 55.
Yeah, then those are federal cases that are actually, those are all civil cases.
Okay.
And so the ones I'm talking about, so if you go to state court, I think my numbers would even be more significant in that regard. So I had my first felony trial, fraud trial, when I was less than 2 years out of law school in the AG's office. And then I prosecuted various things. I also learned that if the evidence fell out from under you, as a prosecutor, you need to dismiss the case. You don't just keep trying to make somebody plead to something when you don't have evidence.
Wow.
You know, and that's the right thing to do. And
It's the right thing to do.
and
but
that's
it's
and so I also ended up defending prisoner writs at both the district and appellate court levels when they were trying to get out of prison, and with the Board of Pardons and with the Department of Corrections. And in fact, years ago when I was defending these Board of Pardons writs, some of the prisoners didn't like me so well. And I actually had to get a concealed weapons permit when you actually used to have to show cause.
Oh yeah.
Back in the early days.
In the
oh my goodness.
in the days when you were subjects and not citizens, yes.
But
You know-
then I also, during that time, I spoke at the National Attorney General's Corrections Conferences several times on various subjects because we were doing some things that were quite unique and they were working in Utah. And that was very significant.
Who's we? Is that your office?
No,
or
it's
that
me. Well, okay, so it was the Department of Corrections under Gary DeLand. He put in some really good policies, and Lane McCotter as well. And those policies were very significant, and we were fighting lawsuits regarding a number of issues. And prisons and jails are different because you're long-term in the prison.
Yeah.
You're short-term, average of 30 days or less in a county jail. And you're going to be several years in a prison. But we were fighting different issues and winning them. And it was actually, some of our policies were just kind of unique and saying, wow, you can do this and this is legal. And yeah, absolutely. We won this actually already. And so that was something I was able to do to teach other attorneys general back in the day. And the difference that I have is that I actually supervised attorneys in the AG's office, and I've supervised attorneys outside the AG's office, attorneys and paralegals as well. And
in Utah's AG's office?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
I worked for 3 different attorney generals. And so in a vast variety of areas, and this is something that the public doesn't always understand, is there's actually 3 main areas of the AG's office. There's the criminal, which is about a third. There's defending against monetary lawsuits, the agencies, which is about a third. And the other third is basically legal counsel. You're giving counsel to various Department of Air Quality, Department of Health, all these different agencies.
Kind of policy stuff.
Go ahead, things like that.
Yeah. And then there's part of that there's areas that kind of fall in different areas, like Department of Professional Licensing. You might be taking away licenses if people aren't, behaving well as a doctor or something.
Mhm.
So there's those kinds of things too. Well, I've worked in almost every major area of the office, and criminal appeals, I've done some of those. I've done work with professional licensing. I've done work in the Department of Health, Department of Human Services, and Department of Corrections. So I actually have a really broad understanding of that office because I've worked basically in most of the major areas.
What Paul is saying is that you're interviewing for a job and your resume is actually quite extensive with your experience already. And that's phenomenal. I mean, do people understand what the job of the Attorney General is? Because you represent citizens that have issues with government.
Mm-hmm.
You represent businesses who have issues maybe with citizens or with contracts or whatever. You represent cities and counties and law enforcement, but you also represent citizens against law enforcement or cities and counties. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it depends on the situation. I would say that, for instance, that, and I know that Paul 100% agrees with this too, we represent the public. That is our client. And now the public, we're not going to release prisoners that are dangerous because it's dangerous to the public. It's very intuitive in that way. But it also is true that you want to have a constitutional jail, like they do at Tooele County Jail. And because that's also harmful to the public if it's not meeting
Yeah.
constitutional standards. And so there's actually a requirement there in the AG's office that you should be balancing this. You shouldn't just say, we're going to defend this agency at all costs, even though they just railroaded someone's constitutional rights. And that's happened at school board meetings. Parents have been kicked out of school board meetings for exercising their free speech rights. The AG should have stepped in and say, wait a minute, you shouldn't do this. And that's
maybe at least advise them.
Yeah. And so they're over the council of the school, but they're also defend the schools. And I actually defended school districts when I was in the AG's office, did Title IX cases and things like that. And so the AG actually should be somebody that can stand back a little bit and say, wait a minute, have we gone afield here? Are we actually violating someone's constitutional rights? And we shouldn't just defend them at all costs. Now, if nobody's done anything wrong, we shouldn't settle it.
Yeah.
And I'm finding a lot of times the state is settling cases for like $50,000 to $100,000.
Well, protecting the people is also protecting the coffers.
Yeah, exactly.
So Paul was during COVID. I know that you actually had opportunities where the commission was asking you to have your deputies step in to stop people from meeting in a public place. And you actually took a stand against that, saying, I'm not going to do that. Has that aged well for you? Like, I think that after the fact, we're all looking back on COVID and we're just shaking our heads. You actually had to kind of go out on a limb with that because we didn't know what this virus would do, but the common sense part of you, I remember sitting in those task force meetings with you and you're saying, common sense says we're outside. Common sense says that 6 feet distancing. I'm not sending deputies into that. Do you find that aged well? And do you think that there are citizens that can actually come after your deputies or come after police officers that were actually enforcing that? Not yours, but others now?
Well, I guess there's where we disagreed a little bit was on the mass gatherings, I like to think that people can make their own choices. Even in the pandemic, whether you want to go attend a mass gathering or not, the risks. It's not like we weren't. Media wasn't scaring the living daylights out of us during COVID. I mean, think about it. When that first broke, we're all destined for death, it seemed like, the way the presentation was. And so there was an effort to, to squash some mass gatherings. And when people be a little bit defiant, or, in one particular situation, when someone defied that, there was kind of this request that I show up with deputies and guns and prevent that event from occurring. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. The last thing I ever want to do is present a situation where we're going to get in a gunfight over a mass gathering permit. And my recommendation to them was, look, if you're not going to issue the permit and they hold the event in spite of that, with the misdemeanor crime you would charge anyone, and so I pretty much told them, I'm not going to show up with guns and deny people from accessing this mass gathering, and that's really where probably the situation that was the most significant. And then of course there's always, if someone walks into Walmart and refuses to wear a mask, what do you do? And my instructions to my deputies was, we don't enforce a mass mandate, but being a private entity, as Walmart is, being owned privately and not being a government entity, if they want someone not there because they're not wearing a mask, it's not a mask issue; it's a trespass. And so I told them, I said, we need to take it to, codes we already have in place, and that's probably where I got a little bit sideways. I wasn't huge on enforcing a health mandate. even though statute allowed me to, I was just not comfortable with the mandate, and therefore did not enforce any component of it. And the good thing is our health department, even though the mandates were in place, they weren't insistent on it. And so, I'd like to say that our health department was pretty agreeable in general for the general public. They weren't as hardcore. They weren't camping people outside of quarantined human beings. Because, when that initially started, that's kind of what this was.
Yeah.
They to be able to quarantine someone, and then if they absolutely refused to quarantine, that there was supposed to be some component of legal action and enforcement and arrest that would take place if they refused to quarantine in their homes. And so the good thing is we had some conversations, and lines were drawn in the sand. And so very early in the pandemic, whether it's the commission or the health department, we all understood where one another stood, even though we might have been a little bit contrary to one another.
Well, and the public was being very boisterous about what they thought to their council or their commissioners.
Yeah, and that's the beauty. That's why we must always appreciate the elected offices, because that's what I'm there for.
Yep.
To keep one another in balance, and we're not always going to get it right. The good thing is that was one situation where it bode well for me. My approach to it was correct, for lack of a better term. I don't know if correct's the right
It was
word.
constitutional.
Yeah, and no, I would have never forgiven ourselves if we got in a gunfight over a mask mandate.
Here's the irony about this event that he's talking about. That same night of that event, he ends up having to send our sheriff's department deputies to Salt Lake to back UHP because that was the riots.
Oh, right.
Were happening. Do you remember that?
Yeah, well, and that's it, and that's an effort, because when them riots broke in Salt Lake, it was very apparent to every law enforcement official across the state that the resources required to keep the peace in Salt Lake City were going to exhaust very quickly. Whereas Salt Lake PD is large of an agency as they are, as large of an agency as Highway Patrol and the Department of Public Safety is in order to keep the peace for multiple days. That's you are going to go through manpower very quickly, and so we're on the phone very quickly, and Tooele City, myself, and I believe Bransfield City, we all pitched in and sent some guys in there, and by the time we got there, the riots were finished. However, keeping the downtown area safe was our guys' role thereafter, and it was imperative that happened, because if that stuff could quickly spill into any county, any city, and
Right.
And if we can squash it there, better there than Tooele County. And the good thing is we did have an event. I guess it would be a Black Lives Matter, a BLM
Protest.
parade.
March.
And it was in Tooele City, and we joined forces with Tooele City Police. Grantsville sent guys, and it was very peaceful. And
It was.
And a lot of that, the people that attended from BLM were very respectful. We didn't have any issues with property damage on their route, and we were ready to go for it. Everyone was out in force, and that was a fine balance between having a presence but also not looking militaristic and like you're trying to squash people's right to protest, and because that's just as important to protect as to keep it from turning into a riot. And that's one thing that we can never blur the lines. There's a huge difference. They are not even in the same arena. Protests and riots. One's a constitutionally protected right to do, and the other one is just thugs and criminals that need to go to jail.
So true.
Yeah. It's true.
With the situation in the summer of love, if you got a city mayor like Salt Lake City mayor, like Sim Gill, not prosecuting these rioters who actually assaulted law enforcement.
Yeah.
I mean, personal friends of mine were assaulted during that time. Who is that somewhere where you could come in and either step in and say, look, you need to prosecute people like this, or is it a civil matter where the officer needs to sue the actual criminal?
Well, that's an interesting idea, but
that'd be a new one.
I will say this, that I know that Sim Gill gets a lot of attention, but I'm not sure that this issue is necessarily Sim Gill. I think it's the mayor of Salt Lake City, because the mayor of Salt Lake City said, we don't really care that you trash people's property. Now, I didn't see the mayor of Salt Lake going around to those property owners saying, oh, here's 20 grand. You just had this much damage.
Well, communists are going to communist.
And so there was actually marching orders, and keep in mind, huge distinction between a sheriff and a police chief. A police chief is supervised by someone that is not a law enforcement officer. It's the mayor. And the sheriff is accountable to the people. The chief of police is not. They're accountable to the mayor.
Right.
And so that's a huge distinction. And so that's what you had in Salt Lake, was the mayor giving the marching orders that were really disregarding the people's property rights that are very, very
and
significant.
their safety.
Yeah, and their safety. Now, interestingly, though, you see a difference in Cottonwood Heights, where I live. Robbie Russo, who's actually endorsed my campaign, he's the chief of police there.
He was the chief of West Valley City.
Was he? Okay. And
when
what
my
he
dad
did,
was worked there, I think.
what he did is he brought. There was a ridiculous protest.
I can't hear you. Are you talking to us?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
when we're talking, it floods you out. So just raise your hand and we'll shut up.
But in any event, go ahead.
Russo, two different chiefs.
They are?
Yep. There was a Russo a long time for West Valley that was before the current chief, Colleen. And, and because for the longest time I thought they were one and the same.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
thank you. I thought they were.
They do different. They are different. I don't even
Are they
know.
related?
I remember watching that video from Cottonwoods Heights, and
Which one? They had a few.
the one where they were up against the protesters were against the chain link fence, or they were standing by one, and the police shut them down soundly and immediately, and didn't let them get out of hand. And
they were trying to go into the neighborhoods and damage the homes, and they parked the cars there and said, "You're not going into these
The
neighborhoods."
city councilwoman actually threw a water bottle at one of our police officers there.
Yep. And it was, unfortunately, some of those things were not just filled with water.
Right.
They had urine and different things in them, and there was
That was a private neighborhood.
Yep. And so that was a great way they protected the property. And so you got someone in Salt Lake, and the police chief's going to be a liberal police chief, and he's didn't care about protecting the people's property rights.
Hey, is that why they paid Salt Lake City officers so much more? Because they had to work under a crappy mayor?
it was the poo tax.
Well, I try to remain positive in life. But I'm going to use this opportunity for a plug for something that will be on the ballot this November. And that is, the office of sheriff. We are not written into the Constitution. We are codified. We are written into state code to exist. But this November, the people will have an opportunity to vote to ensure that the office of sheriff is written into the Constitution. And why, day in and day out, you don't really realize the importance of it. But when you have a situation as challenging to society as the pandemic, is when the guy the public elected
run
their police enforcement entity means the most. And so, and in general, we get along very well with most our legislators, and this is, but also that is why they were so many of them were agreeable to put this on the ballot.
Mhm.
And so we're looking to be written into the Constitution. So, very often I'll get asked, "Are you a constitutional sheriff?" Well, there's two definitions of that. Are you a sheriff that protects and adheres to the Constitution, which
Right.
all of us can claim that. There's also the other component of it. Are you written in? And in that regard, we are not in the state of Utah as of yet. And
That's
so,
insane.
It is.
I want to do a big push to have that done on the show.
Yeah, actually,
I do.
This is significant because Sheriff Winder was doing some crazy things in Salt Lake County, and they stripped him of half of his powers, and so they basically said he can't patrol, and it was basically because of him, and that was still in place. I think they're trying to reverse it now. Is that right?
that has a lot to do with what you're seeing with the change of unified and Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office that Rose is going through right now. And while a lot of people say it's a bad thing, actually, it's not a bad thing. It's one of the things that's taken it back to so that Rosie can run a sheriff's office like it's supposed to be run.
Yep.
Yeah, and if people don't like it, they don't vote for her again.
Yeah.
Right.
That's how it should be. So it's not administrators and mayors making your public safety decisions. It's somebody that's accountable to you, the voter.
Yeah, and unified police, who it's hard to figure out. Okay, who's accountable for that we can vote for?
Yeah, who is over unified police? Is it a chief?
Well, ultimately, if you go high enough, it does end up on Rosie's desk. However, all of these different agencies that contract with Unified / the sheriff's office, they're insistent that they have a chief, and the majority of them decisions are made by the area chief, whether it was Taylorsville, but that model, and through my career, I've watched this go back and forth. You'll have, I think Taylorsville, I think they're on their third police department.
Yeah.
They'll start their own police department because they don't like the way Unified or the sheriff was doing it, and then they realize, man, this is expensive. Or and so then they go back to contracting for them law enforcement services. Then they get new leadership in at Taylorsville, or there's a rub somehow between the Unified or the sheriff's office and the
Politics.
you see the politics get involved, and so then they start their own police department again, and we've watched this time and time again, and it really needs to go back to where Rosie's a sheriff, not an executive director of a police department. Sheriff, she has an enforcement element, just like every other sheriff's office in the state.
Right.
I have an enforcement element, and I have a corrections element. And so this is actually going to take us back to where she's functioning. She's a functioning sheriff, just like the rest of us. And in my mind, that's a good thing.
And Paul, my understanding is that this, what's being voted on is to be able to put that in the Constitution so future governments can't tinker with it and take away some of the powers of a sheriff.
Absolutely. And what a lot of people don't know is when you get east of the Mississippi, it is not uncommon for your sheriff to be a bureaucrat, just like a police chief. They are appointed. They are not. And if you want to know what the future holds for anywhere, you start at one coast or the other. It's like a wave. It starts making its way across the country. If you want to know what's coming our way, look at what's happening to California. It hits Nevada, namely Las Vegas, and then that's the pressure that's coming our way. And it's our job as citizens to say, I don't want to be like the East Coast. I don't want to be east of the Mississippi. I don't want to be like California, for hell's sakes. I want to be Utah, and and we have to fend that off. And one way of doing that is to say, no, my sheriff's an elected official. You would never want to give up the AG's office to
No.
be an appointment from a governor or anyone else. That person needs autonomy to advise and to prosecute, independent of an executive such as the governor. It's no different than it's in a smaller scale when you start talking county.
Right.
The county manager should not have influence over my actions, and the governor should not have influence over the AG's actions.
Well, it's also separation of powers, which is a principle of the United
Checks and
States.
balances. Hey, is it true that only a sheriff can arrest a governor?
You don't have to answer that, Paul. We can move on.
I'm curious
I don't
because
know.
I
I've
saw
never
in the
heard
books
that.
when I was studying criminal law, and I thought only a sheriff or an elected official can actually arrest a sitting governor. I thought that was interesting.
You would probably have to be a sheriff to do it and survive.
Well, and that is one, and I don't want to pull a bunch of the attention from Frank here, because I don't want to sit here and champion the office of sheriff, because really the discussion today is Frank. But if you go to the police chief mayor model, our police chiefs do fantastic jobs, and but they can be hamstrung if they don't have a good mayor. And if you have a good mayor, it's a great opportunity to do great things in a police agency. But when you have someone who has no business making law enforcement decisions, you're in trouble. When you have a mayor that realizes they're not even qualified to make law enforcement decisions, you typically will have a good police agency, because the police chief is usually very qualified to be a police chief, and that's why I say the AG's office. It's not currently threatened, but there's always these discussions, these grumblings. Should it be appointed by the governor?
Yeah, we discussed that earlier, that the grumblings are out there.
And any governor that would be a proponent of that, we need to be leery of.
So I'm curious, with all this, with the potential, this is a really, really big job.
Yeah.
And with the potential of this, we want to help you. So any way that we can help with this initiative on the ballot,
We talk about it till November. We
Yeah.
bring it
Yeah.
up on every
let
show.
us know, because it's highly important. What we have found, especially through COVID, and I know a lot of people, citizens, I think, have discovered the most important job in our county is the sheriff, because when it boils down to your rights, he's elected to take care of those rights for you
Well,
on such a local, finite level, and then the AG above that.
Well, and let me just explain that a little bit. As the chief law enforcement officer of the state, I'm not doing the day in and day out. It's the sheriff's.
Right.
And it's actually really important not for an attorney general not to be prideful and puff themselves up and say, I'm in charge of this whole thing. That would be a disaster.
Right.
Different counties have different issues and different challenges, and you need to let the sheriff of those counties be in charge of them. That's why one of the things that I want to have happen is when the feds come to town and they want to arrest somebody, I want to make it a requirement that they have to notify the sheriff before they did that.
Oh, imagine if like that guy down in Utah
Yes,
County.
exactly.
Imagine his response. I'm not doubting the FBI story that he was violent right off the initiation, but imagine, would it have been different had a deputy showed up, someone that he knew?
Yeah.
The sheriff himself.
Yep, the sheriff himself. And I'm a little bit familiar with that, and I absolutely believe that that person wouldn't have died if they had said, hey, we need this executed. Can you guys execute it?
And the sheriff would already know this person. They probably dealt with him before. Hey, buddy, we need to talk. So let's get to some of these comments.
Oh, there's a whole bunch of questions.
Great.
David's chiming in, so we're going to get the good ones.
Okay, well, I want to first go to Jason. Jason Mackerel commented, I don't know specifically what all Frank has done, but I do know that he is on the board of foundation his wife founded called Beauty from Ashes Ministry, which he brought up. And he also left the website for that. Hi, Mom.
We should pull that website
Hi, David.
up.
Hi, Fred. David said, can we get more out of the prison system to force prisoners to repay taxpayers who give them room and board? I feel like the current system, maybe a few potholes for prisoners or recycling centers for convicts. Is that something that would happen? Does it have to be a federal thing, or can states actually put prisoners to work like they did in Arizona?
Yeah, we definitely do not want it to be a federal thing.
No.
And,
One, you become reliant on it, and then you have to start shopping for prisoners. The South found that out real hard in the all through the 1900s.
Well, and we just really don't want the federal government having anything to do with running our prisons or jails.
But didn't the jail at the Aparo, Sheriff Aparo from
Sheriff Arpaio.
So he was actually putting contractors out of work because he was underbidding with his prisoners to fix potholes, to build trenches or whatever.
Yeah.
But it actually made a lot of sense.
It does.
To save money.
I'll tell you that from when I was involved in corrections, very much so, it was very significant that a lot of the office furniture for the entire state was made by the Department of Corrections inmates. It was fantastic. It was good. It was utilitarian, but it was decent. They had a little bit more like executive desks that are a little nicer, and then they had the general desks. They were solid wood, and they do a lot of industries. There's farming, there's dairy.
It's win-win.
So they are doing those things. And I'll tell you that usually statistics say if you can actually get into a decent job, it does a lot more for recidivism than any outside program outside the prison would do.
Picking up a trade. I think that
electrical,
anything carpentry is probably, or electric, anything like that where they can step out of there. And a lot of those businesses on the outside don't perform a background check or aren't as stringent with the returns on that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to say all recidivism is cured by someone getting a job on the outside.
No, it's not.
But I'm sure there's a percentage that is.
It helps. And, the other thing that's a pet peeve of mine is the Department of Justice sticking its nose where it shouldn't. From time to time, it does stick its nose into prisons and jails. They're starting to do that right now.
Big money, big business.
Well, with the gender confusion issue, they're starting to try to tell the Department of Corrections, which will eventually be our jails, how we should take care of the prisoners. And my point is, no, we don't need them to tell us. If they don't like how we run our prisons and jails, they can just send their inmates somewhere else.
Paul, you ready to take Title IX into your correctional facility?
Well, Title IX, that's for the schools.
I know, but it's the same. It's the same
Did you
thing.
see the recent thing
the
with
gender
Ted
confusion,
Cruz,
though?
where he was calling out that judge who's trying to be?
I didn't.
Ted Cruz called her out because she sent a repeat sex offender to a women's prison. He said he said that he identified as a woman, and Ted Cruz went off on this woman, and he said, so you're telling me that you sent, what about the rights of the woman cellmate?
Well, not just that,
but a repeat sex offender who had all his tackle.
Yeah.
And
you said tackle. I'm rubbing. Are you ready for a maternity ward down there in your facility, Paul?
That's always a challenge. And always get an inmate, a couple every year that come to us pregnant, and that's just a balancing act with the court. And,
if we start sending men down and they'll make you cell them up with the woman, put them in the same cell because, that's being humanitarian and compassionate to the less than 0.001%.
You're acknowledging their gender.
And to go along with what Frank said, very seldom does involving federal government in any make it better.
I don't know where it ever has made it better.
Yeah, if you can't say very seldom, unless you're willing to give an example that it worked anywhere, sometime.
What they have is a lot of resources, and that's it.
Yeah.
And so,
and they gun to your head for those resources.
there's an opportunity at times where you can tap into the FBI's resources because they have some capabilities that local government afford, whether it's forensics or some DNA analysis and what have you. And so that can be beneficial to us. But what you don't want is you don't want them coming in and telling you how to a prison, because the federal prison system is not better than my jail.
No, it is not.
Big usually not the answer or consolidating it. And so, as far as Department of Justice and what have you, trying to involve themselves in what they have no clue. Take a practices in an area that is not remotely similar to what we're doing or to what our population is, and they try to have this giant one-size-fits-all program, and if you're doing it, they think you're not doing it right, where no, we're usually steps ahead. You know, even if you talk about the Utah County situation where the gentleman was killed, and I don't want to sit here and armchair quarterback the feds. However, I will say this: the day of dynamic entries for SWAT teams is all but gone.
I hope.
We will typically, there's so many questions, and I don't want to sit there and say they should have done this, should have done that, because I don't know everything that they did do in an effort to do it, but there was no report on whether they thought, well, why don't we sit here, and if he leaves, we'll conduct a traffic stop. Let's get him away.
And the body cams were off, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. Well, let's look at how the feds have been operating under a policy of dynamic entry for any circumstance. I mean, look what they did to that P. Diddy guy. They did a dynamic entry on his house, a music producer, and you can argue, well, part of it is
maybe there was
trafficking,
or hostages.
but that wasn't the circumstance they were searching for. They were searching for evidence of trafficking,
like video.
Yes, and that video is coming out. It's coming out anyway if there is. That video of him beating up his girlfriend when they did the not to go super Trump, but when they did the Mar-a-Lago raid, they did that in a semi-dynamic entry. And yes, we need to ditch that. But we can go all the way back to Waco.
Yeah.
Where that guy went jogging every morning. Every morning he went jogging right past where the ATF had their watch house. He jogged right in front of him. He knew him. He stopped by their house on his jog. And instead they said, we'll do an entry where there are pregnant women and infants.
Was a no-knock warrant, basically. At 6 a.m. and most American citizens hear their door getting kicked in, they are going to defend themselves. Officers get hurt. People get hurt. It's such a high intense scenario, and I can't think of anything being more important than the safety of our officers and our citizens' lives. So I know it used to be because they were afraid they'd dump drugs, or if there's a hostage situation, someone would get killed. But now they're going in for potential warrants, guys with warrants, or a guy who made threats on the Facebook. How does this make sense? And why are we still allowing it? And why are these people not going to local sheriff's offices and letting the FBI, the ATF, any type of U.S. Marshal going to the local department and saying, one of your citizens we are looking to arrest. Would you back us on this? Or tell us about this citizen if you know. Like, who knows the citizens better than a sheriff?
Well, that's exactly it. There may be many opportunities where the sheriff's department has a lot of more specific information that they would have and say, yeah, he is going to go to the fitness center at 6 o'clock in the morning. That's where you get him. Don't get them in a dangerous, in a neighborhood where you're going to put a lot of other people in danger. Yeah. And so, I think that, and I strongly agree with the sheriff here that we do not want the federal government to be dictating this one size fits all how we should do things. We certainly do not want the federal government telling us him as Uncle Sam or Big Brother. We don't want him running our prisons and jails. And that's what they actually are trying to do right now. This isn't theoretical. This is regarding the gender confusion. And right now, like in places like California and other places, the inmate gets to choose.
Which is insane.
It's utterly insane because many of these, like you said, sometimes they're sex offenders, and we don't care if he calls himself a woman. He's clearly a man, and he's doing sexual things to
You're
women.
putting women at
Wasn't
risk.
it New Jersey last year had 3 pregnancies come out of their state prisons?
Well, I didn't hear that, but that doesn't surprise
I think it
me.
was New Jersey had 3 pregnancies come out of their state and it was all one lady,
Perpetrator.
one beautiful, empowered, stunning and brave woman who
I'm going to get to these questions because we're
fathered.
almost done with
Dave's
the
got a
sheriff.
good demolition man
Dave
question.
says use force against people that are not violence never a win for anyone. He's referring to the sheriff going out and arresting people during the COVID.
Yeah, I agree.
Jason says that would be great. There's really no reason we couldn't. I love the potholes idea. Teach them a trade to fix our awful and dangerous roads. The only place in the world I've seen worse roads is in southern Costa Rica. The office of the sheriff, this is by Jason, must be written into the Constitution. Absolutely.
And we're gonna back you on that 100%.
Dave says
We'll talk about it on every show.
And I was involved in that early on in suggesting that. Johnny Miller from USIP, he was taking a lead on trying to help, galvanize support of the sheriffs. But I was actually giving my input that we need to do this.
I'm stunned it's not done
Any
already.
citizen who votes against that is voting against their voice.
They're right. I'm stunned. This has not been done already.
And that's the reality. And that's what's hard to explain is so many citizens believe it's already there. And it is not.
Mm-hmm.
And what this would allow us to do is if we're written into the Constitution, it's a lot harder for there ever be a move from the legislature or the governor to create a statewide. I mean, we already have the state police with Department of Public Safety.
Mm-hmm.
Their focus is, your state roads and some investigations that require their resources or if we need their help. But it would prevent them from ever being able to unilaterally create just the state police and basically dissolve sheriff's offices and local police departments.
And the people's voice.
Yeah, and it's not that Jess Anderson. I think the world of him, but he doesn't know how to police Tooele County the way I do, and it would never be coming from him necessarily. This would be something much bigger than him. It would be a legislature or governor making a big push for this, and we just want it more difficult for them to ever move that direction. And that's the hard thing is most citizens have no that you get a majority legislature vote to eliminate the office of sheriff, we're done. You have no elected law enforcement.
That would be very telling to see who voted against doing something like that. So David made a comment, and I think you and I have discussed this before as a way to kind of rein in the FBI. He said, I wish the sheriff was in charge of any FBI agency operating in and out of borders in the Free Republic of Tooele.
And that's what I was suggesting. I would actually work toward making that a requirement.
Sheriffs actually absorb FBI in all their local areas. So there would actually be a division of the FBI in every sheriff's department.
Oh, I don't know if we need political
by the sheriff. But, where all the resources go to Quantico, if you need, all the resources that you've talked about.
I would rather see the FBI become a scientific and administrative part to support the different state and county and
that's what I mean.
local.
They're part of the sheriff's department.
And I think that there could be some potential, like when they're hunting down spies or they're hunting down terrorism and things like that, that there are some unique abilities that they can help. What I don't want is them coming in on some routine execution of a warrant and acting like they're in charge.
Why does it seem like
so many involved FBI agents starting these terroristic threats?
Well, and it seems like the FBI, anytime they do something now, their first call is to friendly media sites to say, hey, at this time we're doing this. because it's the CNN and MSNBC is always on site.
Interesting. Yeah.
They are. I mean, and so it seems like right now the FBI has, and it was born politicized. J. Edna Hoover was a very political animal.
Well, but let me tell you that, and I pointed this out when I did argue against those FISA warrants back in front of Senator Hatch's Judiciary Committee, that we get these what is it? These actions by the FBI. And they are actually acting as if they're like, and I mentioned this earlier, they're acting as if they're like the CIA
Right.
in foreign countries. And there should always be a huge distinction when we're dealing with citizens here in our country. We should have the full extent of the Fourth Amendment.
Right.
That's what should apply. And that's what's will keep them out of these problems that they run in. So I don't think I really do want an FBI agent in every county.
No, that's how you get a political officer.
No.
That is a communist. But I would like to see the FBI maintain that support. And I'd be great if the FBI had a foreign intelligence interdiction team.
Mm-hmm.
Be it a tactical team along with an administrative team and a broad cyber warfare team. But when it comes to dealing with in the United States, they are what they should be, is a support role for local law enforcement, be it advisory, scientific, forensic, all of that.
So Fred Swain says, what can the sheriff do to protect us as citizens from federal overreach? And he directs it also, what can the AG do?
Can I just jump in here, Paul, on this? I think, first of all, like I said before, the sheriffs are on the front lines in dealing with the feds in this area of trying to have roads, trying to patrol roads, and they're fighting them all the time. I think that what I bring to this table is I've worked with the sheriffs, and I want us to have a unified push to push back on the feds, saying, look, you can't do this. We need to be able to have roads, and you can't say just because this is federal land, we can't improve this road, going across your land. You can't say that we can't follow fugitives, or we're trying to chase down a criminal or something. We don't want any kind of interference in us.
They can't hop the reservation fence and hide out.
Exactly. I want it to be the case that the sheriff is able to enforce the criminal law in every square inch of his county.
Right.
I don't want him to have to say, oh, this part's on federal land, now we can't do anything about it. And I the same with the people that make the roads, those
What
types
about
of
like
things.
illegal immigration?
And illegal immigration is now a separate issue
Yeah.
that, again, the sheriffs are on the front lines on, because when they're squeaking in here now, like I said, I'm going to shut that faucet by going to the legislature and say, make it a felony to bring someone in or to fund bringing someone in.
Right.
That means the NGOs and everything. But it's going to be the sheriffs is going to help say, okay, who are all these people that were dumped here by New York? Let's dump them back in New York, because we can do that. We need to round them up and dump those ones back. And it's going to take the sheriffs helping us. But, we're seeing crime increase. We're seeing sexual exploitation, slavery types of things increase. And, of course, the amount of drugs.
And guns.
Well, when people are willing to break the law to get in here, there's going to be a number of them that are inclined to break law. I'm not saying all of them. Don't get me caught up in the word salad, but I'm not saying all of them. I do have a question for Paul, though, because I've seen the movies, Paul.
And he's about probably ready to go.
Yeah,
he promised an hour.
Paul's a busy man. He's down there doing official stuff today. But okay, so I've seen the movies. Now, which desk drawer is it that you open up and is just full of shields for when you deputize a militia? Is it your bottom right? Do you keep it on your left side?
That's a question. Jason said, I had 2 sheriffs in rural Idaho say that if the feds come for our guns, they would deputize everyone in the county.
I didn't want to force Paul to go to that direction. I just wanted a general question. I mean, do they issue like 100 shields?
That's a great question, though. Is that something you would do?
Well,
or could do?
Drawer, but the reality is for the time being, when it comes to dealing with the feds, and going with Fred Swain's question is, what can I do? Right now, until at the state level and the legislature, and even beyond that, it's got to go up to our federal delegation that really pushes to, I guess, define federal agencies the way they need to be defined. And so that's really where the heavy lifting needs to occur. Locally, because that heavy lifting hasn't occurred, I can sit here and say, I'm going to do all this, do all that. But for the time being, my mission is to make sure I have a good rapport with my federal agents that operate in and out of my county, and so that they feel life's about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Really concerned right now because we have a good rapport investigations unit with guys operating with federal shields, or whether they're operating with U.S. Marshal shields, that they will reach out to us. And so right now, my goal is to maintain a relationship with them to where we can have that conversation versus them flying in the darkness of night and sneaking doing stuff that I do not support as the sheriff. Now,
It's a courtesy, basically,
Right.
professional
Well,
courtesy.
Was that team in Provo? Was that team a local team, or was it someone they brought in? Was it the HRT brought in from
Secret
DC?
Service, wasn't it?
they usually gather quite a bit from multiple agencies because but yeah, when it comes to dynamic entry, they have their designated teams that do that, and some of them can be a combination of multiple federal agencies or task force that combine to do that. And 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 I guess that one is one where it would have been nice for someone to say, "Hey, why don't we gas him out?" If you're going to do it at the house,
Yeah.
why don't you come see us? Because that's how we do it. That's replace the dynamic entry
Yeah.
at the level. Is
Shut off the water, shut off the power, and order pizza every day out in front of his big window and sit and eat pizza.
and that's just basically us in court saying it's not worth killing someone
Yeah.
for a bag of weed.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's not drugs. It's not worth taking people's lives over to go in and recover a bit of paraphernalia or contraband.
Or potential, people that are in the house with you, a child, a wife, a spouse, a husband, whatever.
Yeah, and 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 I think local law enforcement is a lot better at this because we have to continue to coexist with this property.
Right.
And they can do what they want, then they leave, and they're not the direct contact typically. But a lot of people do not designate from one uniform to the other, one shield from the other, one star from the other, and they lump us all into the same category, and so I'm all about these federal agencies being a support uh, element to local law enforcement. If I'm putting together a team of guys to look into something, and I'm a little slim on resources or personnel, it'd be great to just call and say, "Hey, can you guys help us out with that?" This,
Yeah.
and because there are just some things. Our reach really starts to diminish as I start getting outside of Tooele County, where we do these elements that can cross county lines, state lines, and what have you. And so, but that's where I think they need to focus. Their focus needs to be at that level versus making sure the citizens of Tooele County are following what they want to see.
Just like you're a resource for the different cities in Tooele County.
Yeah, I'm not going to come in and tell Chief Sager over in Grantsville or Chief Day in Tooele City what needs to happen, and we're very good in having a conversation I got a phone call just yesterday from Juab County Sheriff because he's got a case spilling into Tooele County, and we just connect. And he's not going to come into Tooele County and just look into stuff without reaching out to me. So Doug Anderson and I had that conversation. I said, let me have a detective call you, and they'll team up with you. We don't want to get in the way of what they're trying to accomplish. We want to help them, but we also, when it spills into Tooele County, we feel responsible for what happens at that point.
And you've actually had that a few times. I know of cases of recent, since you've been sheriff, where the crime might have started here, or it started in Salt Lake County, it happened here, and then the fugitives are in Salt Lake County, or you've got those kids that were killed, and you don't know they're from here. That common courtesy, just reaching out to these other county sheriffs, is priceless. Mm-hmm. Considering, FBI will sometimes come in and step on your toes and try to take an investigation or all of that. And yet you're the one accountable to the people. They're bureaucrats. But at the same time, if they were just working with you, the ATF is working with you, there's so much more. I don't see it going wrong ever to have more insight to what you're trying to accomplish, more help.
And that's just another reason why Frank's who I support, is because I think he understands how that needs to look. If there's some legislation to push for, what an educated human being to have that conversation and speak with common sense to our legislators or to our federal delegation to champion a piece of legislation at the federal level that makes the FBI no longer an adversary. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of citizens look at them as an adversary. And while we maintain a good relationship with the agents operating that we frequent here in Tooele County, we got several that live in the Tooele area. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to maintain relationships with them to where them conversations will typically happen. But they shouldn't just be typically happening. It should be mandated. It should be some sort of law. And that really needs to happen, not just at the AG's level. It needs to happen at
the Justice Department. It needs to be a national push. I'm right now, if you ask me today, I'd say the FBI is overstepping its bounds. It's doing a lot of stuff. And an ideal way to deal with it would be if they had a structure where they worked within a structure that everyone could understand. But we're in a highly electrical political time right now where it's going to bleed over into the FBI, into the CIA, into everything. I don't know if it's touched like the marshals yet, but
we've even said in the past, it's not these agents. It's the bureaucrats. It's the appointed leaders that are extending bounds, giving orders that go above and beyond what your actual abilities are. And the ATF is even making their own laws. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, and that's part of that federal overreach that we talk about.
Yeah,
you might have heard that Chevron doctrine, and if we can, reel that back, and that I'm very much hoping that the U.S. Supreme Court does that. But basically, it means if it's not explicit in the in Congress, in a congressional statute, the agency can't do it. What they're doing instead is having this deference, and they can just kind of fill in those gaps.
Right.
And we need to make Congress be Congress. And actually, the Supreme Court has already said those kinds of things before. If it's so important to Congress, they need to pass it as a statute. And I'll tell you, a lot of these overreaching things would never be passed by Congress.
Because it would make them look terrible. They wouldn't get reelected.
And here's the FBI again. It started becoming. You talked about J. Edgar Hoover, and that's true. But it started becoming more politicized in modern times when Janet Reno under Bill Clinton.
Yes.
She started targeting pro-life demonstrators.
Yes. And she was there in Waco too, right?
She was there in Waco, but it also got a little bit politicized under Bush 1.
Okay.
But that's not to say there wasn't pressure.
Yeah.
Bush one went after a lot of Christian and white separatists,
Okay.
but they brought it on themselves because they were robbing banks
Right.
down in Georgia
Right.
and Louisiana and Oklahoma and a little bit in Texas. But people don't like to mess around in Texas because
What
they've got
about
an express lane.
Reno.
So yeah, so Reno started going after pro-life sidewalk demonstrators, and then it's gotten progressively worse. When Obama was there, it stepped it up even more. And this tying it back. This is the thing I was worried about with these FISA warrants is that right now we're using it for terrorists. That was right now 20 years ago. I said this is going to be used.
What a terrorist is.
Right, and this is going to be used against innocent people. And now what we've seen under the Biden administration, everything that was bad under prior Democratic presidents has just been amplified and on steroids with Biden.
Right.
And so now there's a lot of distrust for the FBI because they're just going after, they're going after Christians, even,
The Justice
they're going
Department
after
called parents,
conservatives,
domestic terrorists.
the parents in school board meetings. They have no business even intervening.
A woman just got 5 years for singing outside of an abortion clinic.
That's crazy. Yeah, that
Sheriff,
shouldn't happen.
Do we need to let you go? Because
I'm going to need to go too, actually, pretty soon.
Yeah, I think we got to round you both up. First, let's let Sheriff. Can I invite you back on, say in a month, just to talk about the county, how we're doing, things you'd like the people to come up with? There's a lot of questions here, a lot of stuff. David brought up teaching. Fred says good job. David brought up teaching inmates productive having them listen to philosophy podcast. I bring up demolition man. Maybe we could bring crocheting
the FBI
in.
agents should be charged with violating human rights of some sort without briefs to local police. There's larger risks to the public and lack of communication. Fred Swain says you would have to solve the federal agency food chain perception problem. Jeff Adamson says they collude with CNN and others when an agenda is being applied. They should be required to run operations through elected sheriffs in each and every state if it involves citizens of their country.
And that's what I've been saying.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what I've been saying.
I like that. I like that the sheriff is one of us. He went and got trained and became a person that could carry the sheriff's star for us. And then we elected him. We decided to put our trust in him. And I like that. We don't elect Garland in DC.
Nope.
We don't elect FBI agents but our sheriff we elect.
Yep.
And our sheriff
has
a
put
good
the time
sheriff,
in
I
and
think
actually proven his record. So we re-elect him and force him to run no matter what.
Yeah, I don't know. Your retirement age might be like well into your 90s. I hope you recognize that. But anyway, Sheriff, we'll let you go. Thank your wife for letting us steal you away for a little bit.
No,
and
thank you for it. And again, I apologize for the casualness of my, but a lot of people probably won't even recognize me.
Hey, we talked about it Saturday. You're not doing. I told you to sit in front of the backdrop of beautiful, but you went professional on me, and that's okay. But
do you have last words about Frank that you want to share?
I just think that this is an opportunity for us to put an AG into that office that brings more to that table than I've seen. I'm not just talking about the opponents, because there's some. It's an office that's got some definitely some good people running for it, and some nice people, but lots of people are nice. Are they bringing to battle a war chest of experience and that coincides with what we want as the citizens of not just Tooele County but the state of Utah? Are they bringing and they supporting what we want? And so that's why this is just and the span. Most people have no idea everything that the AG's office is responsible for.
It's true.
Like, they're a legal advisor to the governor's office. They impact us at the training level, not only at post. They are the legal guidance and review for posts, whether it's administrative rules or what have you.
And that's the police academy.
Right.
That's what post is for anyone who doesn't.
Police officer standards and training is what post stands. But when it comes to overseeing some of the disciplinary and I hate to call it prosecuting, but overseeing the administrative revocation of bad players in law enforcement, the AG's office has a hand in that, and we need that. And so many people just have, Frank brought up the legal guidance they provide to DOPL, the licensing. They touch so many components of government that we need someone with as much experience and know-how as we can get. And right now, that's Frank, and that's why I'm pretty passionate enough to show up today.
Thanks.
Outstanding.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Please, thanks to Shannon, and enjoy your family. It's much deserved that you are not dressed up today and you actually get to be casual. You guys earned it. So thank you for
Sheriff.
being on. We'll be in touch again because we want you in person and to go over some other county stuff that's been happening. But I'm sure grateful for you today. I know Frank is.
Yes.
Anytime, Frank. Let me know what else you need.
Thank you. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Have a good one, Sheriff.
Thank you, Sheriff.
And I'm going to need to leave here soon, but
Yes.
can I make a comment about
I want you to finish out real quick.
Okay, great. For one, I think it's very significant. The people that are actually endorsing my campaign, by and large, actually know my work. The people that are endorsing the other campaigns do not know their work in court, their legal work, their legal abilities.
Most of your endorsements I'm looking at are sheriffs,
Yeah, and I don't even have
county
everyone on there.
attorneys.
Yeah.
gun rights attorneys, Veterans Caucus, Conservative Caucus. You've got the Sheriff's Association director. You've got a ton of sheriffs on here. I think that speaks volumes, because you've got to have the support of your law enforcement here in Utah, but they need the support of their AG.
Right, and the problem with the competitors have some fine people endorsing them. Excuse me, I'm losing my throat here. But they have no idea how they're going to do legally. They just don't know them very well. They're political endorsements. And mine, I think, are real world attorney endorsements.
Your guys are the people who you will be supporting closest
Yes.
are endorsing you.
Yeah,
And
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 that
the
is
people have seen my work.
Mhm.
And so they speculate, oh, this person's going to be a great attorney general, but they've never actually seen any legal work they've ever done. That's really true with everyone that's endorsing my competitors. But it's the opposite is true with me. They've actually seen my legal
Yeah,
work.
you've actually either represented one of their own,
Mhm.
or you've represented their city.
Yes.
You've represented someone that has had civil liberties
Mhm.
violated. You've been to so many federal trials,
Mhm.
state trials. I don't know when's the last time we've had an AG that has done so much prosecuting or
Well,
defending.
I honestly don't think we have since Paul Van Dam. He was a Democrat.
When was that?
And
Yeah.
I remember I worked under him, and I was hired by Wilkinson. He was a Republican, and then Paul Van Dam beat him actually, and he
What
actually
year?
that was in 90? Was it 90?
So he was an actual litigator.
He was also the former Salt Lake County attorney.
Let's also remember Democrats weren't always nutcases.
They
like
weren't
are
always
now.
nutcases, absolutely, but he had a lot of significant experience.
Most of
And-
our
but
sheriffs were
But most of them,
Democrats out here.
yeah, out of actually Ed Phillips years ago used to support me, and he was a Democrat down in Millard County, but very conservative. But so Paul Van Dam was probably the most experienced attorney in terms of litigating that we've had in recent time. But I don't think he didn't have nearly the civil rights experience that I have in terms of fighting civil rights cases, defending officers, but also bringing them for religious freedom, parental rights cases,
These
gun cases.
vaccine mandates, have you had that too?
Yeah, and that's where when COVID started, people called me and they said, Frank, can our church meet? Frank, can our school meet? And I would tell them, yeah, because you're not a place of public accommodation, and we have this thing called the First Amendment.
What about police officers who didn't want to get the shot?
Well, I didn't have an opportunity to help them. I wish I would have, but I did. Was called by Alliance Defending Freedom that we mentioned earlier, and they said, Frank, can you help people get religious exemptions that are in medical companies? Because Biden had that mandate.
Right.
Everyone had to get the vaccine. Even
he
if
didn't have the mandate. He was easy. He made companies have it.
Yep.
So private hospitals required it.
Yep.
Police departments
what he
required
did.
it. And he just had, it wasn't me. I'm not violating your rights. They're private. They can violate your rights.
Yeah,
he tried pushing it through OSHA.
He was making them do it. And by God's grace, everyone I helped get with a religious exemption got it, including my daughter, who's a nurse at Primary Children's Hospital. So that was kind of personal
Amazing.
to me, wanting to help in that regard.
I have to ask, I know you have to go, but with all this devil's advocate, with all this litigation experience and with all this background, are you seeing yourself as an attorney general that's going to be constantly getting into litigations, or is there a different type of expenditure that the office is going to need to fight cases? How much do you think we're going to need your litigation experience?
This is the good part. I actually think, if anything, I can decrease the cost of these big suits, like the Title IX ones. I'll bring in Alliance Defending Freedom, because Alliance Defending Freedom are the experts. There's no one in this state that's an expert on fighting for girls' bathrooms and sports. Now, I've fought Title IX cases. One of the other candidates has fought some Title IX cases, but that's nothing like defending bathrooms in sports. It's a new area. And so I'm going to bring them in. I'll have an assistant AG in the office that's assigned with them. But I'm going to let expertise speak, and that expertise isn't going to cost us anything.
That's amazing.
Not to mention, you win a few battles, and I think the adversary will be leery about.
What is your website?
It's frankmylar4ag.com.
Yeah,
Number 4.
Everyone go check out. I'm going to show up 2 websites. Go check out
ag.com.
Yep.
Beauty from Ashes.
That's
a ministry that helps
people in oppressive and abusive relationships.
So it's a fellow minister. I love fellow ministers. Thank you. But no, that's good. I think that is something that's desperately needed. We need to build outside of legal system support.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is something we need to build.
And we help. There's advocates that will go to court with people, go to mediation, and help them be side by side with them. There's some counseling and things like that as well.
That's good. And
go to frankforag.com because Frank Mylar.
Alliance Defending Freedom. Everyone go check that out.
Here's why I'm saying that is because you are in quite a race.
Yes.
And you need donations.
I do.
And that's something that you did so well at convention. And I keep telling the delegates, look, if you want your delegate choice to win, you can't stop at convention. You've got to keep going. And I know you've got a lot of delegates who have been really great about hosting you. You're always welcome into our county if I can ever help, get you in front of more people. I'll work with your campaign to do
Let's do that.
But please go to his website. If you like what you've heard today, if he's got that donate button right there at the right. Give what you can. Get a yard sign. His people, I have yard signs available. So reach out, PM me. I'll give you a pickup location. If you want to show your neighbors, talk to your neighbors about the candidates that you believe in. Make phone calls for him. If you can't pay money, please donate your time. That's just as important. And there are so many issues that he's covered on his website. So get to know Frank. You heard it from our sheriff. When you get someone you trust that actually gives you the the what for on a candidate, especially delegates who have spent the time vetting you and talking to you at length.
Yeah.
I know you've got some incredible supporters.
Thanks.
Um,
Well, and I think that the big thing is I think the reason I won the convention is the word about me started getting out. And,
Right.
you know, one, that I've got a lot of experience, but I think more significant, it's actually the kind of experience that I fight for people's rights and often don't charge them for it. And that is the same thing that is, I think, the winning hand in this primary. And so I need to get on radio. I am on radio already, thankfully, and I'm doing ads. My wife sends some ads, and we're going to get.
It's expensive.
We're going to get probably Sheriff Wimmer to do some ads with us and some things like that. But it's expensive. And so if everyone on here listening can give me $50 or $100, that would help a ton. And because we need to raise thousands. In fact, by this next week, I need to raise 20 more thousand. The other campaigns have thousands and thousands because they have special interests, lobbyists, you know, these credit unions, Zions Bank, and all those big companies are just shelling out thousands of dollars for them.
So for this to be a successful grassroots, show the Utah residents why delegates are important, and their job that they do is so important. For this to be, you know, we've got to get him past the primary, and we've got to show that. Now you didn't get 60% at convention.
I got 59.76.
59.7.
I'm telling you, I think
5 votes.
I think all you delegates are applauding this because everyone got right on the edge, and then I was like, okay,
Well, I like that there's a three-way race. I
Yeah.
think that helps me a lot.
it does well, and you're right. They're all good.
They're all good people.
We've talked to all of them. I like them all, but you do have a much deeper resume.
Thanks.
You do,
and word of mouth is huge.
and you come out the gate saying civil rights, and I believe civil rights needs to become the new hot term or
Absolutely.
whatever, the new pretty girl in Hollywood. It needs to,
Freedom
because it
first.
applies both ways.
Yeah.
And you need to look at that the Bill of Rights as a black and white matter that's just flat. It applies to everyone equally. It is being perverted right now.
Yep, that's true.
And we need to fight against
Utah
that.
can't afford to lose. We cannot afford
The
to
nation
lose
can't.
the
The people
moral
can't.
values that we have in our state,
That's right.
because we're watching it burn down around us.
And
Yes.
it's going to be more important if we have a federal government that's going awry. Let's hope we get Trump in. Let's hope we get a Republican Congress. But if we don't, it's even going to be more important to have an attorney general
We need to
that'll fight
have-
for your rights.
We need to have a shield in our state.
Yep.
And that's what it is. Someone who, when the feds come to force something down, we need to have someone who's going to stand up and say, wait a second, you and I are going to
Stop
meet
at
in
the
court
border.
over this.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
right.
You know, and it won't be the first few times. It won't be stop at the border. It'll
Yeah.
be, all right, you did this in my state. Now we're going to have to go stand in front of a bigger judge and talk
Yeah.
about it.
That's true.
So
You know?
you're ready out of the gate to go after
Yes.
our federal lands with Supreme Court,
Absolutely.
which I love that. And does it have to be all three offices, or can you go for it now? I know that the Attorney General's already invested a lot of money in the federal lands lawsuit,
Yeah.
ready to go.
Yeah, there's some things that I'll absolutely continue and work on. And there's new ideas, new initiatives that I'll do. And again, like I said, fighting women's sports and bathrooms is also going to be huge. We're going to have to fight back against these Title IX changes that are gutting Title IX. So those are some things that
I may be putting it so prisoners have to go with whatever their sex is when they're born, and not putting them in
Yep.
women's prisons,
Yep.
and not pandering to that bull
and
crap.
not paying for expensive surgeries that are basically mutilations as well.
Well, yeah, not paying for sex changes in our federal prisons or in our military, or that's I mean,
We
okay.
went from Arpaio making them wear pink coveralls to now the Democrats are going to force that on prisoners. This is, and they sued him for it. But anyways,
Okay,
we've got to let Frank
So
out here.
sorry.
Everyone will be back on in a
Take a
minute.
small break, guys.